Hundreds of figures flew out of the heavenly palace like flowing lights, and they were still endless. Hundreds of figures were hundreds of grand Yen immortals. They were grand Yen immortals who had transcended the Yen immortal stage. Their appearance filled the entire void with a supreme aura. It was not that Jian Wushuang could not escape, but he could not. He knew that it was impossible for him to escape from the hands of so many grand Yen immortals. So he simply stood where he was and prepared to fight to the death. Jian Wushuang was alone in the endless sea and could only rely on himself. Although there were 3 Emperor True Souls in the Boyang bottle, he did not plan to use them this time. After all, if their true souls dissipated, it meant that they could no longer be revived. Therefore, Jian Wushuang could only rely on himself. He could even imagine where he would revive after his death. Looking at the black-robed envoys surrounding him, there were roughly no less than 100 of them. One had to know that these were all grand Yen immortals, and none of them were below 3 revolutions. Even though they had already been weakened to a certain extent in this endless sea, grand Yen immortals were still grand Yen immortals. Their strength was still terrifying to the extreme. Jian Wushuang stood in the middle of the void. Beneath his feet was the broken white bone path. A steady stream of black-robed envoys walked out of the heavenly palace and came to him. Jian Wushuang slowly exhaled a mouthful of turbid breath and raised the true sword in his hand, pointing it forward arrogantly. The black-robed emissary who was pointed at by his sword subconsciously took a few steps back, as if no one wanted to make the first move. Jian Wushuang smiled disdainfully. He had taken the initiative to attack when faced with so many grand Yen immortals. The selfless true shadow, the slaughter Dao, the Dao of protection, and the Wushuang sword Dao were unleashed at the same time. This was the first time Jian Wushuang had unleashed 3 attacks at the same time. The Dao of protection was the first great Dao he had cultivated to become an ancestor. Its power was the most vigorous great Dao, and it was the great Dao that encompassed the entire divine power universe. His long hair broke through the band and danced wildly in the air. The blue selfless true shadow surged behind him. Thousands of scarlet lights representing the Dao of slaughter flowed slowly. The invisible heavenly Dao laws that represented the Dao of protection protected his immortal body, and the secret patterns slowly rotated. The majestic scarlet gold divine patterns that represented the Wushuang sword Dao flowed out from the tip of his hair. The 3 rays of light shone on him, making him look so bad that he could not look straight at him. The black robe shattered, revealing the undying and imperishable immortal body. The fire phoenix totem that belonged to the undying blood of the matriarch of the Phoenix clan was humming in front of his chest. At this moment, all the black-robed envoys retreated, their faces filled with extreme shock. Was this the might that a Yen immortal could display? What kind of superpower is this? Isn't it just inconceivable? The 3 questions in their minds made all the black-robed envoys retreat continuously, and even their breathing became a little hurried. The might emitted by a Yen immortal was so oppressive that they could not even raise their heads. This was too terrifying. With 3 great Daos in his body, an unimaginably dense fate flowed. At this moment, Jian Wushuang was the real existence that suppressed the heaven's will. He became completely emotionless. He just casually raised his hand and pointed. Immediately, a celestial river roared and swallowed the void. A 7-star galaxy completely bloomed between his brows. Wherever his divine thought went, it was his domain. In his domain, he was the true emperor, using an immortal style to fight against an immortal style. At this moment, Jian Wushuang's control over the immortal style had reached an unimaginable level. With just this finger, more than 10 black-robed envoys died on the spot, and a crack was forcefully torn open in the encirclement. All the black-robed envoys were shocked. They could feel a terrifying flow of fate from this finger. All of a sudden, all the black-robed envoys were certain that Jian Wushuang was not a Yen immortal. His existence seemed to have surpassed even the grand Yen immortal and reached some unknown realm. There was no other reason. The luck surging around Jian Wushuang was so thick that it even affected their judgment. With 3 streaks of light, Jian Wushuang seemed to have an ethereal fate descending upon them. He crushed them with an unknown power. The invisible sword in his hand was already extremely dazzling. Behind him, the selfless true shadow, which was more than 1,000,000 feet tall, also held a huge invisible sword in its hand. It was as if he was splitting open the sky. At this moment, the Wushuang Sword Dao was activated. Unparalleled Sword Dao, Star River Lake Ocean Sword Intent. Second move. River. The majestic celestial river descended from the sky, shattering the void. The celestial river formed by billions of sword essences flowed around Jian Wushuang and then roared as it charged forward. This was the pinnacle of the Wushuang Sword Dao. The river sword intent dealt 100 times more damage than before. The selfless true shadow, which was over 1,000,000 feet tall, also released the Star River Lake Sea Sword intent at this moment. The sky collapsed and the white bone path shattered. At this moment, none of the black-robed envoys dared to stay any longer. They all retreated rapidly in horror. However, this vigorous and resplendent sword essence was too fast. As it shattered the white bone path, it directly swallowed dozens of black-robed envoys. At this moment, a 3 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal was killed without any resistance. The brilliant Sword Dao Celestial River devoured everything. Billions of sword intents were incomparably dazzling. It attacked everything that could be destroyed. The entire imperial city began to shake violently, and then gullies split open on the walls. When the Sword Dao Celestial River descended above the heavenly hall, all the black-robed envoys who had escaped looked extremely miserable. They knew very well that the heavenly palace would never be able to withstand this attack. A thought was shattered, and it was only a matter of time. Just as this unparalleled river of Sword Dao was about to topple the heavenly palace, a figure quietly walked out of the heavenly palace and met it. At this moment, thousands of hazy mist dispersed from the figure and enveloped the Sword Dao Celestial River. This was a powerful attack, an attack that could not be blocked. However, Bian Ziyuan could no longer dodge. His raised arms were pressed into a strange bending posture at this moment. The robe on his body was directly crushed, revealing his flowing cloud and watery chest. Ah! The veins on Bian Ziyuan's forehead bulged. He had never thought that this sword strike would be so terrifying that even he was actually unable to block it. Damned fellow, I will definitely crush your head with my own hands. The divine blood began to be squeezed out of every pore of his. Bian Ziyuan felt that his immortal body could not hold on any longer and began to show signs of shattering. His eyes turned extremely red, as if they could explode in the next moment. At this moment, thousands of flowing clouds and water ripples began to slowly flow around his body, emitting an extremely unique aura. Bian Ziyuan didn't dare to be arrogant anymore. The Jian Wushuang in front of him was a completely different person from when they first met. At this moment, the unknown fate on his body was so thick that it almost caused the entire heavenly continent to crack. It was extremely terrifying. The flowing clouds and water patterns on his body increased in speed. At the same time, endless exquisite water mist condensed from his back and transformed into a huge treasure that shook the heavens and the earth. The huge treasure image behind Bian Ziyuan also brazenly crashed into the Sword Dao River at this moment. The two were competing. He roared, and his body was covered in a thin layer of blood mist. The originally unstoppable Sword Dao River was actually shaken at this moment, unable to advance even an inch. Ah! Ha ha ha! Bian Ziyuan laughed maniacally and looked at Jian Wushuang with a pair of bloody eyes, as if he was going to tear Jian Wushuang into pieces right there and then. As for the river of Sword Dao that tore through the sky and pointed at the heavenly palace, fine cracks began to appear at this moment, as if it could collapse at any time. Standing in the center of the void, Jian Wushuang, who had 3 great path providence flowing on his immortal body, was still calm as if he had no emotions. Seeing this scene, he only stretched out his finger and pointed casually. Immediately, the selfless true shadow behind him released an unparalleled yen power that covered the Sword Dao River. The celestial river of the Sword Dao that could collapse at any time recovered and pressed down with unimaginable power. Bian Ziyuan's expression changed drastically. He almost had no time to react before he was pressed under the celestial river. The huge water mist behind him could not hold on any longer and was completely shattered. Facing the heavenly palace that had stood in the heavenly continent for countless years, the unspeakable celestial river of sword intents slashed down heavily. Bian Ziyuan's figure, which was covered in blood, was also finally destroyed in the Sword Dao River. Boom! 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 The heaven continent that was formed by the corpses of the Yen Immortals was split into two by this sword strike. The heavenly palace was also shattered. With the shattered hall as the center, the shattered plane plates quickly sank into the endless sea. Endless black water gushed out from every crack, devouring every piece of land. Under this sword, even a 6 revolutions great Yen Immortal had no chance of surviving. He was too ruthless, so much so that even the black-robed envoy who was watching from afar was more or less affected, his expression extremely miserable. They had never thought that a puny little Yen Immortal would reach such a shocking level. First, the prince was stabbed, his immortal source was almost destroyed, and his soul was destroyed. Then, Great Heaven official Bian Ziyuan was cut down by Sword Dao Celestial River, and his life and death were unknown. At this moment, under the broken sky, only the 200 black-robed envoys were left. However, none of them dared to go up against Jian Wushuang. They were scared out of their wits. With the destruction of the heavenly palace, the heaven continent was split into two, and everything was on the verge of destruction. Jian Wushuang's true eyes slowly swept across. All the black-robed envoys that he was looking at retreated again and again, as if they could escape at any time. Although his divine thoughts were affected by the slaughter Dao, he did not lose control. He knew that he could not stay in the heavenly continent for long. Once the 200 black-robed envoys gathered together, it would be difficult for Jian Wushuang to deal with them. One had to know that there was a huge difference between a Grand Yen Immortal and an ordinary Yen Immortal. Even if Jian Wushuang could kill a Grand Evolution Immortal, what if he could kill 10 or 100? What about 200? It was already something unimaginable. Even though he had 3 great Daos on his back, he was still a Yen Immortal. This was an unchangeable fact. Therefore, Jian Wushuang turned around and prepared to leave after destroying the heavenly palace. However, in the next moment, an extremely fast streak of light shot over. He quickly turned around and stretched out his hand to shoot out a streak of light. The two collided, shaking the void. Then, a figure covered in blood rushed out from the center of the explosion and panted heavily. At this moment, his immortal body was already shattered to the extreme. His chest was almost torn apart, and divine blood kept spurting out. Jian Wushuang recognized that the figure was Bian Ziyuan, and he could not help but feel a killing intent in his heart. All of you, what are you waiting for? Even if you have to use your life to pile him up, you have to keep him here for me. Those who dare to disobey orders will die. Bian Ziyuan roared crazily, crazy to the extreme. All the black-robed envoys looked at each other nervously. No one dared to rush forward first. They knew very well that whoever went up first would die. There was no chance of survival. Bian Ziyuan turned his head fiercely and swept his blood-red eyes across the black-robed envoys behind him. Then, he actually dragged his broken immortal body and rushed toward Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's eyes turned cold, and the 7-star galaxy between his eyebrows started to circulate. Immortal style, Little Mountain River, along with the selfless True Shadow and the 3 great Daos. Everything about him was unprecedentedly terrifying. Almost at the same time Bian Ziyuan moved, a huge divine mountain rose from the void without any warning and smashed forward. Bian Ziyuan roared in a low voice. He actually used his immortal body to smash the divine mountain and charged forward without slowing down. At this moment, there was only hatred in his eyes. Jian Wushuang's eyes were as dark as water. He simply stretched out his palm to Bian Ziyuan, who was about to stake everything. In the next moment, 5 celestial rivers surged out of his palm and crushed forward. Bian Ziyuan had gone completely crazy. Facing the 5 celestial rivers, he chose to fight. However, he soon discovered that the immortal style he had released was directly devoured. He did not even have the ability to resist at all. Facing the roaring celestial rivers, he was left with only helplessness. The 5 celestial rivers bound his limbs and shattered his immortal body in an instant. As long as Jian Wushuang wanted to, he could kill him in an instant. However, he did not do so. Instead, he retracted his palm and pulled Bian Ziyuan in front of him. At this moment, Bian Ziyuan was on the verge of death. His bloodshot eyes had completely dimmed, but he still stared at Jian Wushuang crazily, as if he wanted to skin him alive. Jian Wushuang did not kill him because Bian Ziyuan saved his life when he was being chased. "Don't come looking for trouble again. I'll let you go." Jian Wushuang spoke in a deep voice, his words filled with supreme authority. Bian Ziyuan, who was already on the verge of death, grinned. "You dare to speak to me like this? You're just a puny little Yen immortal. Who gave you the courage to speak to me like this? Do you think you have me? I am a 6 revolutions grand Yen immortal, while you are just an ant." The celestial river tightened, directly turning his limbs into dust. "Humph!" Bian Ziyuan groaned in pain. His eyes were about to bleed. "If you don't kill me today, you will definitely regret it." Jian Wushuang frowned slightly. He felt a bone-deep threat from Bian Ziyuan's words. As for threats, his method was to completely eliminate them. However, Jian Wushuang had no intention of attacking at this moment. Looking at Bian Ziyuan, whose immortal body had completely shattered and no longer had the strength to fight, he felt compassion. "I'll spare your life. You can leave," Jian Wushuang said in a deep voice and was about to throw him away. When Bian Ziyuan heard this, he gave a strange smile. "Do you really think that you'll be able to beat me? I'm afraid you still don't understand the difference between a grand Yen immortal and a Yen immortal." Hearing this, Jian Wushuang suddenly felt a sense of crisis. As if to confirm what he was thinking, Bian Ziyuan, who was originally on the verge of death, suddenly surged with a terrifying suction force. The 5 celestial rivers that had been restraining him suddenly weakened and began to crazily transfer the Yen power into Bian Ziyuan's body. Jian Wushuang's expression changed drastically. He could feel the extremely abundant Yen power in his body flowing away crazily. And the source of the loss was actually on Bian Ziyuan. Bian Ziyuan, who was originally on the verge of death and had his immortal body shattered, began to rapidly fill up his immortal body at this moment. His shattered immortal body was filled again, and even his realm was recovering at an unbelievable rate. In just a few seconds, more than half of the Yen power in Jian Wushuang's body had been devoured and he could not control it at all. He had never expected Bian Ziyuan to be able to devour without any conditions. Bian Ziyuan, who had regrown his arms, was filled with madness. His new arms grabbed Jian Wushuang and began to devour him even more crazily. "I've already warned you. If you don't kill me, you will definitely regret it." Bian Ziyuan smiled sinisterly. Because of the vast and boundless Yen power in Jian Wushuang's immortal body, his newly born immortal body was cracked. "After I devour you completely, I'll see how a puny little Yen immortal like you has the power to shake a grand Yen immortal." Jian Wushuang's expression was cold. In the next moment, the selfless real shadow behind him suddenly opened its eyes and faced Bian Ziyuan. It smashed down heavily. Boom! The sky shattered. Bian Ziyuan was too engrossed in devouring, so he did not notice the blow above his head. By the time he reacted, it was already too late. His entire body was sent flying 1,000 feet away, and his immortal body, which had just recovered, was almost shattered. Jian Wushuang took a few steps back and his face turned pale. If he had not stopped Bian Ziyuan in time, he would have been swallowed by Bian Ziyuan. As a large amount of the power was drained, the selfless true shadow, the slaughter Dao, and the other Daos that relied heavily on the power began to fall into a deep sleep. This put him in a very passive position. Bian Ziyuan, who had completely recovered, wiped off the divine blood at the corner of his mouth and looked at Jian Wushuang with a sinister smile. "I really didn't expect that a puny little Yen immortal would actually have such terrifying energy in his body. I only absorbed it for a few dozen breaths and it actually allowed me to recover completely. I have to say that you are truly a terrifying existence. Now I can't wait to swallow you completely. You must be the opportunity for me to break through to 9 revolutions." Hearing his voice, Jian Wushuang felt disgusted, and the last bit of pity disappeared. He took a step forward and said coldly, "You want to swallow me? It depends on whether you can do it." "Oh? I want to see how you're going to kill me." Bian Ziyuan laughed loudly. In the next moment, he suddenly raised his arms and grabbed more than 10 black-robed envoys with his supreme and terrifying power, throwing them at Jian Wushuang. The black-robed envoys that were grabbed exploded into a bloody mist in the air and pressed forward. The boundless blood mist engulfed him. Jian Wushuang's face was cold. He condensed an invisible sword in his palm and slashed the blood mist apart. Bian Ziyuan turned to look at the 200-odd black-robed envoys behind him coldly. "If you don't move, I don't mind devouring all of you or turning you into a bloody mist." All the black-robed envoys revealed a look of panic in their eyes. They had already witnessed Bian Ziyuan's thunderous and cold-blooded methods. If they did not do as he said, they would definitely end up in an extremely miserable state. In short, he would die anyway. It was better to fight. A black-robed emissary gritted his teeth and charged at Jian Wushuang. If there was a first, there would be a second and a third. A moment later, all the black-robed envoys pounced on Jian Wushuang like a swarm of locusts. Looking at the sky full of black-robed envoys, Jian Wushuang quickly took out 2 emperor-grade pills and stuffed them into his mouth, ready to release his strongest sword move. However, when the 2 pills completely transformed into medicinal strength and flowed into his limbs and bones, he suddenly coughed out a large mouthful of divine blood. Then his aura became dispirited. Originally, the selfless true shadow and the slaughter Dao were dormant. Now, the remaining Dao of protection and the Wushuang sword Dao were completely withered. He thought that the emperor-grade pills could stabilize the situation. He did not expect that his undying and imperishable immortal body would not be able to withstand such consumption. At this moment, he could not even use the Wushuang sword Dao, let alone the strongest sword strike. The black-robed envoy, who was the first to rush over, pushed Jian Wushuang back hundreds of feet with a palm strike. Then, he seemed to have discovered something and shouted excitedly, "He's already at the end of his rope. Everyone, let's work together. We can definitely kill him completely." All the black-robed envoys went crazy when they heard this. Anyone who could kill Jian Wushuang would be able to become a minor heavenly official. As long as one could become a minor heavenly official, they would be able to share a trace of the Emperor's fate energy. This was enough to drive every black-robed envoy crazy. Jian Wushuang, who was already at the end of his rope, was helpless against the full-strength attack of more than 200 black-robed envoys. All kinds of immortal styles and treasures pressed down on him. He could not withstand it and spat out large mouthfuls of divine blood. Bian Ziyuan, who was watching this scene from afar, revealed a ferocious smile to vent his hatred. In his opinion, Jian Wushuang's complete destruction was already settled. In this heavenly continent, or even in the entire endless sea, who could block so many 3 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal's moves? Just as Bian Ziyuan was about to devour Jian Wushuang, he felt a great fear of life and death, forcing him to stop and look around in horror. In the next moment, an inexplicable and boundless force began to surge in the originally shattered void. Under this inexplicable force, a unique diamond-shaped radiance was quietly refracted, like a screen of light. "Good disciple, I'm late." A mighty and furious voice that sounded like it was above the 9 heavens completely resounded throughout the wilderness at this moment. Under this majestic and furious roar, all the black-robed envoys stopped their movements for a moment. Time seemed to slow down. Bian Ziyuan only felt the divine blood flowing in his immortal body freeze. The air dropped to freezing point, and everything was filled with dead silence and coldness. Then, layers of ripples appeared in the void. Immediately after, thousands of white sword intents spread out like a blooming lotus. At the center of the sword intent, 2 figures stood. There was a man and a woman. The middle-aged man had a clean face and no beard. He was extraordinary and his long hair danced in the wind. The heroic spirit that the woman exuded was enough to overshadow her beauty. Her black gold long robe perfectly accentuated her figure, making her look extremely mysterious. Each of them had 6 long swords at their waists, and they were filled with an imposing manner that could not be looked at directly. What flowed around them was not yen power, but extremely pure sword intent. The entire shattered void seemed to have fallen silent at this moment. All the black-robed envoys subconsciously looked at the 2 uninvited guests. Cold sweat flowed down Bian Ziyuan's temples. The terror of life and death that surged out of his heart was brought about by these 2. Jian Wushuang, who was trapped in the center by the black-robed envoy, was already at the end of his rope and his immortal body could be destroyed at any time. After looking at the 2 figures, he finally revealed a bitter smile. Yan Fan raised his eyebrows and smiled. Then he was completely furious. "You dare to hurt my disciple? Are you tired of living?" Sensing that the coldness around him had completely disappeared, a black-robed emissary was dissatisfied with his arrogant words and actually directly suppressed him. "Clown!" Yan Fan sneered and looked at the black-robed envoy who was about to rush over. He did not even bother to draw his sword. In the next moment, a subtle sword intent burst out from the lotus throne under Yan Fan's feet and slashed forward diagonally. A shocking scene appeared. The immortal body of the black-robed envoy, who was running at high speed, instantly shattered and scattered miserably in the void. It was as if nothing had happened. It was deathly silent. "Good disciple, leave the rest to me." With a step forward, thousands of sword intents swept across the wilderness. Yan Fan laughed and flew toward Jian Wushuang with Zhongli. Bian Ziyuan shouted in disbelief, "Stop them! Kill them all! Leave no one alive!" As the order was issued, more than 200 black-robed envoys surrounded Zhongli and Yan Fan crazily. Faced with this terrifying power that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, the 2 true sword immortals smiled quietly as if they were looking down on him. In the next moment, the void was completely replaced by a diamond-shaped light screen. The endless sword curtain slashed down. The sword curtain was a sword move that could easily kill 100,000 death immortals under the blood sea. It was a sword move that Jian Wushuang had to deal with all his strength. As for the fate of these black-robed envoys, it was completely confirmed when the 2 sword immortals appeared. The sword curtain fell silently. Everything was set in stone. All the black-robed envoys, who were ready to fight with all their might, felt their eyes suddenly light up, and then their heads spun. All of them, without exception, more than 200 black-robed envoys were directly killed. It was only an instant. Even the immortal body's bones turned into debris and scattered in the void, turning into stars. "Disciple, we aren't too late, right?" Yan Fan and Zhang Li landed in front of Jian Wushuang and said with a smile. Jian Wushuang's face was pale. He cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for coming to help, seniors. I am very grateful." Yan Fan reached out and put his hand down. "There's no need for thanks between us," he said in a serious tone. Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly. "Actually, you didn't have to take the risk." Hearing that, Yan Fan immediately patted his chest and said, "If a master can't even protect his disciple, he might as well die. Besides, disciple is trapped by this group of salted fish. Only these 2 sword immortals would dare to call hundreds of 3 revolutions grand yen immortals salted fish." Disciple Zhongli, who rarely spoke, said in an extremely domineering manner, "If anyone else wants to kill you, let us take care of them. We don't want any trouble." Jian Wushuang did not say anything. Instead, he looked ahead subconsciously. Bian Ziyuan, who was not affected by the sword curtain, saw Jian Wushuang looking at him. He almost lost his balance and fell into the void. Bian Ziyuan was still in a daze from the terrifying scene just now. More than 200 black-robed envoys, which was more than 203 revolutions grand yen immortals, had all died strangely. Even a 9 revolutions grand yen immortal would not be able to do such a thing. But now it all happened. All of them died in an instant. All of the heavenly palace's resources had disappeared completely. Without anything to rely on, his face turned pale. I actually let a guy go. Then I'll take care of him," Yan Fan said in a low voice. His palm had already quietly placed on the hilt of his sword at his waist. A 6 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal did not seem to be worthy of him drawing his sword, but in order to end the battle quickly, Yen Fan drew a snowflake sword. The void directly plummeted to the freezing point. Even though he was thousands of feet away, Bian Ziyuan still felt his blood freeze. He was absolutely certain that he would not be able to block this sword strike. Therefore, he made a prompt decision. Almost at the same time as Yen Fan drew his sword, he tore open a bloody wound on his chest with his fingers. Divine blood gushed out from the bloody wound on his chest and dripped into the void. In the next moment, the originally dead and broken heavenly continent suddenly surged with all kinds of extremely powerful yen power. Then, figures rose from the heavenly continent plane like flowing lights and came to Bian Ziyuan's side. In just a few dozen breaths, hundreds of grand yen immortals had gathered. Moreover, there was an endless stream of grand yen immortals flying up from the heavenly continent plane. They were all extremely thirsty for blood, and they surrounded Bian Ziyuan with bloodshot eyes. Bian Ziyuan took a few steps back and pointed in Jian Wushuang's direction. He said fiercely, "As long as you capture the 3 of them, I can supply you with my blood, including the blood of the prince. What are you waiting for? Let's attack together." All the bloodthirsty grand yen immortals went crazy and rushed toward Jian Wushuang without any hesitation. Yen Fan smiled with pity. All living beings were equal under his sword. However, at this moment, Jian Wushuang, who was fully focused, felt a burning sensation in his chest. Then, before he could react, a pitch-black bead seemed to have sensed something and flew out of his arms into the void. Jian Wushuang saw the black bead clearly. It was the black bead he found in the Black Abyss prison in the first heaven of the lower 3 heavens. Ever since he had found this black bead, it had been lying peacefully in his arms without any abnormal phenomenon. Other than the 3 emperors' true shadows being extremely wary of it, the black bead no longer had any sense of existence. However, the black bead, which had no sense of existence, flew out of Jian Wushuang's arms and into the void. Its speed was so fast that it was even faster than Yen Fan. What the hell is this? Yen Fan was puzzled, and he loosened his grip on the sword hilt. However, under this chaotic and broken sky and on the broken heavenly continent plane, no grand yen immortal would care about such a small black bead. Bewitched by Bian Ziyuan's divine blood, the grand yen immortals all rushed toward Jian Wushuang from all directions. As the heavenly continent plane fell into an irreversible split, all the grand yen immortals trapped in the heavenly continent regained their freedom at this moment. The strange barrier above the heavenly continent disappeared. Nearly half of the grand yen immortals, regardless of how terrifying the endless sea was, flew or swam out of the heavenly continent. Nearly half of the grand yen immortals also rushed into the void at this moment, incomparably crazy. These grand yen immortals who had sunk into the endless sea were once supreme experts who controlled the battlefield. However, after countless years, they had already fallen and become bloodthirsty monsters. Almost at the same time, a giant beast suddenly walked out of the endless sea, which was not far away from the 2 halves of the heavenly continent. He seemed to have just woken up from a deep sleep. 9 huge heads that were like suns looked at the heavenly continent that was about to collapse at the same time. After a brief moment of contemplation, the giant beast dived into the sea and headed towards the shattered continent. At this moment, hundreds of grand evolution immortals charged at Jian Wushuang crazily. Zhongli raised her eyebrows and blocked Jian Wushuang behind her. Then she said to Yen Fan, "What are you waiting for? Let's end this quickly." Yen Fan nodded. Facing the overwhelming grand yen immortals, he prepared to slash out. Only Jian Wushuang stared at the black bead spinning in the void. He could feel that something terrible was about to happen. As if to confirm his thoughts, the black bead that was spinning in the void emitted billions of dark rays in the next moment. This dark light was a strange blackish-purple color, and it instantly covered the entire void sky like a wave. Almost at the moment when the dark purple light descended, Jian Wushuang felt a shiver. He could not help but tremble. This kind of trembling was like a true feeling of powerlessness, even surpassing the feeling of powerlessness when facing an emperor. Jian Wushuang felt that the yen power in his body was trembling and he felt a little dizzy. The 2 sword immortals, Zhongli and Yan Fan, also had the same symptoms. Their expressions changed drastically as they looked at the spinning black bead. At this moment, all the crazed Grand Yen Immortals began to release all kinds of terrifying immortal styles, and violent Yen power spread out. However, a terrifying scene appeared. Almost at the instant the energy spread out, it was disintegrated and devoured by the billions of dark rays cast by the black bead. Hundreds of immortal styles and energy that could destroy any heavenly region were all shattered. Then, the Grand Yen Immortal, whose body was wrapped in Yen power, spurted out divine blood rapidly. In a short moment he became a dried corpse. Nearly 300 Grand Yen Immortals had their immortal sources explode and their immortal bodies turned into dried corpses. The endless black and purple light was still penetrating the earth. Wherever it could cover, the Yen power was all disintegrated and devoured. The immortal sources of the Grand Yen Immortals were also sucked dry, turning into dry corpses. Jian Wushuang's face turned pale. He seemed to have realized something and said to Zhongli and Yan Fan, "Don't release your Yen power. Not even a little bit." "Yes." Zhongli nodded. She and Yan Fan were not killed by the dark light because they did not release any Yen power. Yan Fan's face was also pale. Even though he had seen too many tragic battles, this was the first time he had seen such a strange scene. What exactly was that black bead? The dark light it emitted was actually able to instantly devour the approaching Grand Yen Immortal. At the same time, Yan Fan had an inexplicable intuition that if he had released the Yen power instead of the sword intent, he would not have ended up much better than those Grand Divination Immortals. Under the dome of the sky that was enveloped by billions of dark lights, all the Grand Yen Immortals who released their Yen power were directly sucked into dried corpses, not even leaving behind any immortal aura. Bian Ziyuan had long been scared out of his wits. Almost at the same time as all the Grand Yen Immortals died, he turned around and fled. However, he was still a step too late. He subconsciously released his Yen power. Those dark purple lights were like maggots in his bones, directly enveloping his entire immortal body. "Ah!" he screamed in shock. His immortal body withered rapidly, and his immortal source shattered instantly. Faced with the shattered heavenly palace, Bian Ziyuan finally turned into a handful of ashes and disappeared completely. Jian Wushuang saw everything. He did not expect Bian Ziyuan to die so quickly. It was supposed to be an unexpected bloody battle, but after the appearance of this black bead, it ended immediately. Jian Wushuang, Zhongli, and Yan Fan stood quietly in the dark light. No one dared to make a move. That unknown dark light had the power to kill any Grand Yen Immortal. As the Grand Yen Immortal was completely dead, the billions of rays of light came and went quickly, returning to the black bead in an instant. Then, the black bead turned into a dark meteor and entered Jian Wushuang's arms at an unimaginable speed. Jian Wushuang's hands and feet were cold and he almost fell into the void. Ever since he came to the great Yen domain, he had never felt such a terrifying feeling of being on the verge of death. The black bead with unknown power was too terrifying. Could easily kill any Grand Yen Immortal, so it would be easy for it to kill Jian Wushuang. He finally understood why the three emperors' true souls had been so nervous back then. Jian Wushuang was very regretful now. This black bead was simply an extremely unstable factor. If he were to release even a little of his Yen power, would he be killed immediately? What was that thing that flew here? Where's that black bead? Yan Fan raised his head and looked around. The black bead disappeared so quickly that Zhongli and Yan Fan did not see where it disappeared. Jian Wushuang, who was carrying the black bead, wanted to cry but had no tears. He did not even dare to breathe loudly. The strange and mysterious light disappeared. After a while, Yan Fan dared to move. "Darling, do you know who made the move just now? I think that in this endless sea, there are no more than a handful of people who can trigger that terrifying power just now." "No," Zhongli shook her head. "We've been sleeping in the blood sea for too long. We don't know who else will come here. That's really strange. Fortunately, us husband and wife have always been cutting the weeds and removing the roots. There's no immortal under the sword, so there won't be any opponents who will make things difficult for us." Yan Fan scratched his head and sighed in relief when he saw that Jian Wushuang was safe and sound. It's good that disciple is fine. Otherwise, I'll lose my life. Zhang Li rolled his eyes at him. Idiot, if you had finished the battle quickly, you wouldn't have caused so much trouble. In the future, you better get rid of your long-winded habit. That's not long-winded. It's called attacking the heart. Okay? The best way to kill an enemy is to attack the heart. Yan Fan spoke with assurance. Jian Wushuang slowly recovered from his shock as he watched them bicker. Then, he put his hand into his pocket as if he was ready to die. When his finger touched the black bead, there was no terrifying suction force as he had imagined. There was only a warm and cool feeling, as if it had never been awakened. How strange. How did this black bead wake up? Jian Wushuang pondered. But soon, Yan Fan, who was walking over, interrupted his train of thought. Disciple, what are you going to do next? I want to hear your thoughts. Jian Wushuang withdrew his thoughts and smiled bitterly in his heart when he heard Yan Fan's words. He did not stop him. I came here to find a friend. Next, I'll continue my search. Yan Fan continued to smile when he heard that. Then, we'll protect you on the way. Yes. Zhang Li nodded. With us by your side, there won't be any Yen immortals threatening you in the endless sea. This is not very good. Jian Wushuang scratched his head and did not know how to refuse. It's only right and proper for a master to protect his disciple. What's there to be good about? Yan Fan laughed and flew forward with Jian Wushuang in his arms. Zhang Li raised her eyebrows and smiled as if she was satisfied with her husband's domineering attitude. Then, she followed them. From this, a magical scene could be seen. Two sword immortals were crossing the endless sea, one in front and one behind. In the middle was a trembling little Yen immortal. Almost at the same time as they left the heavenly continent, a figure slowly walked out of the shattered heavenly palace. This figure was the young man who was killed by Jian Wushuang with a single strike. He was also the prince who was trapped in the heavenly continent. He slowly walked on the heavenly continent that had already become ruins. His expression was neither sad nor happy, as if everything here did not belong to him. In the end, he walked to the center of the battlefield and spread his arms. Suddenly, a unique energy fluctuation began to gather in the void. As the energy fluctuations continued to gather, the originally shattered void began to change. One after another, brilliant rays of light that looked like tiny stars began to appear, and then quickly interweaved and linked together. As the starlight interweaved, an immortal source which was shattered appeared again. That was Bian Ziyuan. Thousands of flowing clouds and water ripples flowed slowly. Bian Ziyuan, who was completely naked, suddenly opened his eyes at this moment. Ah! An indescribable force filled the entire void, and lightning snakes shuttled through the clouds. In the end, when his figure was completely condensed, the young man retracted his arms. His face was so pale that it was devoid of blood. The boundless power finally dissipated, and Bian Ziyuan's figure landed heavily on the ground. Wu Shuang, I want your life. At the same time, he punched the surrounding plain into a deep pit. The young man slowly walked in front of him and squatted down. He can't die now. Whether we can leave this place or not depends on him. Jian Wushuang, who had left the broken heavenly continent plain and crossed the endless sea, felt as if everything was a dream. The treacherous heavenly continent plain and the dangerous and terrifying Blood River had all become a thing of the past. Now, he had left safely and suddenly had two masters. From the brief conversation, Jian Wushuang knew that Zhang Li and Yan Fan had probably reached the terrifying height of Sword Immortal before Zhen Wuyang became an emperor. And from their control of sword intent and the Yen power that they inadvertently revealed, they were probably at least at the 9 Revolutions Grand Yen Immortal level. With the protection of these two terrifying fierce gods, Jian Wushuang would have been able to do whatever he wanted in the endless sea if he had not met a real emperor. Moreover, he had not forgotten that there was an emperor with a complete true body in the ring in his hand. Yan Fan, who was walking at the front, spoke while they were traveling at high speed. Disciple, do you know where the old friend you are looking for is? Jian Wushuang shook his head. I don't know. I don't have any clues. Zhongli frowned and said, That's troublesome. The endless sea is called the endless sea because it has no end. Moreover, once you cross the sea surface for too long, you will get lost. If your friend did not have 6 revolution strength, he would have already gotten lost. Jian Wushuang was worried. Although Di Qing was a 9 revolution Grand Yen Immortal, he was already at the end of his rope after that battle. Even though he was exiled, his immortal body was far from recovering. However, Di Qing still had 7 true lives. Even if he was stranded in the endless sea, he would not die directly. Then, Yen Fan continued, My dear disciple, may I ask how long your old friend has been exiled? If it's less than a Hua year, it might still be possible to find him. Jian Wushuang replied, Less than a year. What? Only a year. Yen Fan and Zhang Li were both shocked. To the endless lifespan of a Yen Immortal, a year's time was not even enough for a breath's time. That's right, it's not more than a year, he confirmed again. Yen Fan seemed to be thinking about something. Finally, he said, If it's less than a year, it's possible to find him. You mean, to that place? Zhang Li frowned. He nodded. In this situation, we can only go there and try our luck. Jian Wushuang heard some clues and asked, Is that place very dangerous? My disciple, no matter how dangerous the endless sea is, as long as we are by your side, no one can do anything to you. Yen Fan patted his shoulder. It's just that that place is not dangerous, but a little strange. Zhang Li sneered, and her handsome eyes almost tore Yen Fan into pieces. It's strange, but I'm afraid it's an unforgettable old relationship. The corners of Yen Fan's mouth twitched, and then he said righteously, Darling, what are you saying? Don't bring up the past. I've already ended it with her. Humph! Zhang Li snorted, and the 6 swords on her waist rang. It doesn't matter if you can't forget it. I'll kill you with my swords. Disciple, hurry up and leave. There's no time to lose. Yen Fan left this sentence and flew out first. Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly. It seemed that his cheap master was still carrying a lot of old love debts. No matter what, his heart that was originally hanging in the air calmed down a little. It was much better to search with a goal than to search aimlessly. The endless sea was boundless and borderless. It was difficult for anything to float above it. Only the skeleton of a Yen Immortal could. And the vast heavenly continent plain was completely formed by the remains of the Yen Immortal. As he continued to move forward, all kinds of dimensions of different sizes appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. A plain was not much different from the heavenly region of the endless sea. This place was simply a miniature universe. Furthermore, as they moved forward, there were all kinds of vicious and ignorant Grand Yen Immortals who wanted to kill them. Regrettably, if Jian Wushuang was alone, he would naturally retreat. After all, a 6 revolutions great Yen Immortal was enough to make him suffer. But now there were 2 sword immortals protecting him. Yen Fan, who was walking at the front, did not even bother to draw his sword. He only needed to point his finger, and the unparalleled sword intent could easily tear apart any 6 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal's immortal source. After traveling for billions of miles, there were already dozens of 6 revolutions great Yen Immortals who had died at Yen Fan's hands, and close to 103 revolutions great Yen Immortals. On one hand, Jian Wushuang was shocked by Yen Fan's unfathomable strength. On the other hand, he was shocked by how many Grand Yen Immortals were exiled by Emperor Zhenwuyang in the Endless Sea. No wonder there were so few Grand Yen Immortals in the current Great Sea region that it made one's hair stand on end. They had all been exiled to the Endless Sea several years ago. Up until now, the lowest stage in the Endless Sea was the Grand Yen Immortal. Jian Wushuang guessed that countless Yen Immortals had been exiled here. However, the outcome of the Yen Immortal would not be too good. As they continued forward, the plains on the Endless Sea gradually disappeared, and what replaced them was endless coldness and deathly stillness. Jian Wushuang tried his best to sense Di Qing's aura, hoping to find him as soon as possible. Yen Fan, who looked calm and collected, gradually became more serious as he continued to move forward. His handsome eyes began to look around. Trees? How could trees grow in the Endless Sea? Jian Wushuang was surprised to see such a strange scene, because in front of him, trees that were almost as tall as the sky had grown on the Black Sea that was originally boundless. The tree was tall, and it only had branches that stretched out without a single leaf. It did not look like some kind of immortal tree. While Jian Wushuang was lost in his thoughts, everything around him changed. Zhang Li and Yan Fan disappeared. Oh, another illusion? Jian Wushuang frowned slightly. Almost immediately, he realized that he was in an illusion. Is it because I saw those trees? To be able to make him fall into an illusion in such a short time, the Yen Immortal who set up this illusion did have some ability. However, it met Jian Wushuang, who could see through it with a single glance. Just as he was about to use the invisible sword to cut open the illusion, a snowflake longsword was one step ahead of him and directly tore open a crack in the illusion. Then, a big palm pulled Jian Wushuang out of the illusion. Good fellow, you actually dare to cast an illusion in front of me. I think you're tired of living. Yan Fan was furious. When he was about to attack, Zhang Li reached out his hand. In an instant, the entire illusion shattered, and then a huge furball was caught in Zhang Li's hand. It was a huge rabbit. Zhang Li raised her hand and was about to chop off the rabbit's head. Madam, please hold back. Yan Fan shouted and rushed over, grabbing the rabbit from Zhang Li's hand. What are you doing? Do you want to die? Zhang Li was furious. The corner of Yan Fan's mouth twitched. He hugged the big rabbit and smiled awkwardly. You can't kill this rabbit. It's a friend of an old friend. After saying that, the big rabbit suddenly broke free from his embrace and turned into an extremely agile girl in the void. Humph! The quick-witted girl pretended to be angry, then turned around and ran, quickly disappearing. This wretched girl! Yan Fan muttered to himself and smiled apologetically. We can't kill her. Zhang Li put on an expression as if she did not want to talk to him and pulled Jian Wushuang to leave. However, at this moment, an ethereal and extremely intelligent voice sounded. It was as if it came from the 9 heavens, and it was indescribably beautiful. Since you're already here, why don't you come over to my place and have a chat? Yan Fan's expression changed drastically, and his lips turned pale. Darling, leave quickly. Zhang Li was furious when he heard Yan Fan's charming voice. She glared at Yan Fan as if she wanted to swallow him alive. Then she flew into the sky. I didn't find trouble with you, but you actually dare to find trouble with me. Today, I will smash your Gue you immortal palace. This was the first time Jian Wushuang saw Zhang Li draw her sword. With endless sword intent, she broke the sky and flew up to the sky. Yan Fan's face was pale as he shouted at the top of his lungs. Darling, you must look past this. Your vision is too narrow. Swish! 100,000 sword intents fell from the sky, almost slicing him into pieces. Jian Wushuang's heart jumped. He had never expected that the 2 sword companions would fight with true swords and true sabers. After dodging the 100,000 sword intents, Yan Fan looked at Jian Wushuang nervously. Quick, quick, she's going crazy. Let's go and stop her. Otherwise, we won't be able to live in peace. Jian Wushuang was helpless. Something that could make Zhang Li so angry must have something to do with Yan Fan. It must be a love debt again. The illusion was torn apart by the furious Zhang Li. Jian Wushuang was able to see the real picture of the endless sea. He saw a giant tree that could no longer be called a tree. It was rooted at the bottom of the sea and connected to the sky. Its indescribable crown was almost wider than a heavenly region. An extremely strange fragrance entered his nose. This was an immortal osmanthus tree, bigger than a heavenly region. In Jian Wushuang's memory, even the world tree in the little emperor's big lonely heaven was not as big as this immortal osmanthus tree. He could clearly see that on the crown of the immortal osmanthus tree, there was an ancient immortal palace hidden in the clouds. Zhang Li was furious. He broke through the illusion and went straight to the immortal palace. Yan Fan was scared out of his wits and hurriedly chased after him. This ancient immortal palace seemed to run through the 9 heavens and was extremely lonely. Jian Wushuang then stepped into the immortal palace. On the vast and boundless immortal palace square, there were many huge immortal osmanthus trees. On each tree, there was a moon that gave off a hazy light. Roughly counting, there are no less than thousands of moons. The entire ancient immortal palace was shrouded in the moonlight, giving it an indescribable strangeness. At this moment, Zhongli, who was furious, walked forward with a long and narrow real sword. The square seemed to be rumbling under her feet. In the next moment, the tightly shut doors suddenly opened, and dozens of white-robed figures flew out. Every single one of them was at least 3 revolutions. They lined up in front of the square and looked ahead as if they were facing a great enemy. Zhongli did not even look at them and walked straight ahead. An old man dressed in white standing at the front hurriedly shouted, "Hold on! Without the order of our immortal lord, no one is allowed to barge into the immortal palace. Get lost if you don't want to die. You're courting death," Zhongli said in a low voice. Her violent sword intent was revealed at this moment. The old man in white was stunned when he heard this. He clearly did not expect this heroic woman in front of him to be so domineering. When he saw the terrifying aura emanating from her body, the old man in white gritted his teeth and took a few steps back. He shouted in a low voice, "Set up the array formation." As soon as he finished speaking, the dozens of white-robed men all released their first attack. Their yen powers were connected to each other, forming an indescribably beautiful ancient moon immortal formation. The boundless power was fully displayed at this moment, and the vast ancient moon in the immortal array burst out with brilliant light. Boundless moonlight-colored energy surged out from every white-robed figure, providing pure energy for the immortal formation. This was an immortal formation that gathered the full strength of more than 10 3 revolutions Grand Yen Immortals. Even a 6 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal did not dare to underestimate it. However, their biggest mistake was to use the wrong target. Not only was she a 9 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal, but she was also a sword immortal. She could easily let them know what a miserable outcome was. "Young lady, if you take another step forward, don't blame us for being impolite," the elder Grand Yen Immortal in the lead said in a deep voice. He seemed to be so confident in the ancient moon immortal formation that he reminded Zhongli. However, Zhongli's expression was cold as she raised her sword and slashed forward. A sword intent that was as vast as the sea slashed out. The green jade square was plowed open by the sword intent, leaving a mark that was tens of thousands of feet wide. The floor tiles were shattered into powder. Looking at this earth-shaking scene, all the white-robed men sucked in a breath of cold air and then desperately injected their derived energy into the immortal formation. However, in the next moment, the earth-shattering sword intent actually slashed open the ancient moon immortal formation. It was too easy as tearing a piece of white paper. The immortal formation that combined the full strength of 15 3 revolutions Grand Yen Immortals did not even last for a breath. The sword intent was as destructive as dried weeds and rotten wood. It only broke the immortal formation and did not hurt a single person in white. Instead, it sent them flying. The ultimate target of this sword intent was the ancient immortal palace. At this moment, a black-haired man in white walked out of the immortal palace quietly. He held a true sword in his hand and looked extremely heroic and carefree. Facing the true sword that came from the sky, the black-robed, white-haired man pulled out the true sword from his sheath and brazenly met it. Countless sword intents shot out from his back, shaking the heavens and earth. When the two collided, the entire shattered square shook. Jian Wushuang's eyes widened at this moment. Another sword immortal? In the vast and boundless Grand Secretary domain, even Grand Yen Immortals were considered as an index, while sword immortals were only legendary existences. However, in the Endless Sea, Jian Wushuang saw 3 sword immortals in succession. He was so shocked that he could not speak. The difficulty of becoming a sword immortal had even transcended the concept of cultivation. One had to know that there was no mature system to become a sword immortal. Every swordsman could only slowly explore and then create their own sword path. However, nearly 99% of swordsmen died on the road to creating their own sword Dao. Only the remaining swordsmen, who were far less than 10%, were qualified to pursue the path of sword immortals. As a result, there was no concept of cultivation in the path of sword cultivation. Yen Fan was an example. In order to become a sword immortal, he had wielded his sword for a whole hua year. A hua year was enough for a cultivator to reach the Yen immortal stage. However, Yen Fan only used this one hua year to wield his sword. It was evident how difficult it was to become a sword immortal. He used his sword intent to block the incoming sword intent. When the two completely cancelled each other out, the black-haired and white-robed man stood on the shattered square again. His right foot took half a step back without leaving a trace. It was this subtle scene that Jian Wushuang saw. Then, he was sure that the black-haired and white-robed man was definitely not a sword immortal. Taking half a step back meant that he was not strong enough in the previous confrontation. A true sword immortal would never retreat half a step under that sword intent. However, although he was not a sword immortal, he was definitely only a hair's breadth away from a sword immortal. He was infinitely close to a sword immortal. The world was silent, and there was no more fighting. The true sword was sheathed, and a smile slowly appeared on the ice-cold face of the black-haired and white-robed man. Zhongli, who was angry, changed her expression and looked away. Good heavens! Why is this old thing here? Yen Fan, who looked like he was watching the show, was shocked. He quickly walked to Zhongli and blocked her eyes. Cough cough, I say, we shouldn't stay here for long. We should leave, Yen Fan said with a face full of jealousy. You're leaving? Zhongli glared at him. All right, I'll flatten this immortal palace first. After she finished speaking, she slapped Yen Fan and sent him flying. Then, she strode forward. Long time no see. At this moment, the black-haired man and the white-robed man spoke. His words contained the joy of reunion after a long time, as well as a hint of vicissitudes. Zhang Li's expression became even more unnatural, but he soon recovered. Then she said, Why are you here? The black-haired and white-robed man continued. It's been too long. I don't want to continue sleeping, so I came here with an old friend. Zhang Li sneered. You're really free and elegant. How have you been? The black-haired and white-robed man immediately asked. Not much, move aside. I'm going to flatten this place, Zhang Li said in a deep voice. At this moment, Yen Fan also ran over hurriedly. He coughed on purpose and then said in a low voice, Darling, you won't be angry. Let's go quickly. The black-haired man and the white-robed man laughed and said to him, Brother Yen, since you're already here, come in and have a seat. It's been many years since we last had a good chat together. Yen Fan quickly refused. That's not necessary. We'll go back and sleep. We won't disturb you. Then he pulled Zhang Li away. At this moment, a light and charming voice came from the Immortal Palace. You're leaving in such a hurry. You haven't done anything wrong. Why don't you dare to come to my place? Zhang Li glanced at Yen Fan, who was about to run away. Yen Fan's body trembled. Then, he turned around slowly and said righteously, I've never done anything wrong. It's just that I'm tired today, so I won't bother you. Zhang Li did not want to listen to his nonsense, so she dragged him into the palace. Yen Fan's face was ashen. He shouted at Jian Wushuang, Disciple, come and save me. Jian Wushuang shook his head helplessly and walked into the Immortal Palace. The Immortal Palace was vast and vast. A faint fragrance assaulted their senses, giving them an indescribable sense of comfort. Moreover, under this fragrance, the energy in his meridians was recovering at an extremely slow speed. Walking at the back, Jian Wushuang saw everything in the Immortal Palace. The Immortal Palace was simple and elegant. Everything piled up and had little decoration, but it did not seem empty. Tiny stars and palm-sized moons decorated every corner of the space, making the entire Immortal Palace look like a flowing galaxy. Under the guidance of the black-haired man and the white-clothed man, Zhang Li walked up angrily. At this moment, Jian Wushuang heard whispers coming from behind him. How strange. There's actually a puny little Yen immortal here. Should we chase him out? What are you talking about? Don't you see that they have a special relationship with us immortal lords? Shut up, all of you. Don't you think what happened just now was embarrassing enough? If anyone dares to talk, don't blame me for being rude. After being scolded by the man in white, The people who were killed by Zhang Li stayed aside and did not dare to say anything. Jian Wushuang smiled and did not take their words to heart. In the endless sea, one's strength was far more important than words. As they entered, clouds began to float in the depths of the Immortal Palace. An extremely beautiful woman appeared along with the misty clouds. Unlike Zhang Li's domineering aura, this extremely beautiful woman had gentle eyes and was indescribably gentle and charming. Even Jian Wushuang had rarely seen such a beautiful and gentle woman. She was like a full moon that was hazy. Moreover, she was hugging a long-haired rabbit in her arms, which added a little softness and charm to her. Seeing this scene, Yan Fan's expression was extremely unnatural, but he still forced a smile. Then all the white-robed people in the Immortal Palace cupped their hands and bowed. "Greetings, Vast Moon Immortal Lord." The beautiful woman called Vast Moon Immortal Lord smiled and stretched out her hand to conjure thousands of clouds to lift them up. Then, she looked around and finally landed on Zhang Li and Yan Fan. "It's been a long time since we last met." Zhang Li did not buy it. She stepped forward and said coldly, "Why are you blocking our way? If you don't explain yourself today, I'll flatten your palace." Facing her threat, Vast Moon Immortal Lord could not help but chuckle. "Sister Zhang Li, you're still as irritable as before." Creak. Zhang Li clenched the sword hilt on her waist as if she could draw it at any moment. "Darling, please calm down," Yan Fan said in a low voice, his body trembling slightly. Vast Moon Immortal Lord smiled again. "However, in my opinion, only you can win over Big Brother Yan's heart." Hearing that, Zhang Li's expression softened and she let go of her sword. At this moment, Yan Fan hurriedly said, "Well, this is all a misunderstanding. Now that the misunderstanding has been resolved, we won't stay here for too long." "What's the hurry? It's been so long since we last met. Don't you want to sit down and catch up?" "Sit down," Zhang Li sneered. Then, no matter how much Yan Fan resisted, Zhang Li pressed him down in front of the desk. Jian Wushuang sat down as well and Zhang Li forced him to sit between them. The handsome middle-aged man with black hair and white clothes sat next to Zhang Li. When they were all seated, Vast Moon Immortal Lord sat down as well, unable to conceal the joy in her eyes. "The last time we parted, we were still nameless cultivators. Now that we've met again, we've been separated for many years, and everything has changed." Vast Moon Immortal Lord sighed with emotion. Although his expression was extremely calm, a faint blush had already appeared on his face. She let go of the little bunny in her arms and clapped her hands lightly. Then, 2 rows of fairies holding exquisite silver flasks walked over on the clouds and placed them down in front of them. "This is the moon dew that I left behind after we parted. Now, it's finally time for us to meet again." Jian Wushuang looked over and the silver pot automatically poured out a cup of wine. Immediately, a strong fragrance spread out. Even though he was not good at drinking, he could not help but swallow. There was no other reason than that the moon dew was too fragrant. When Yan Fan saw the moon dew in front of him, he almost spat out his saliva uncontrollably. Then, ignoring Zhang Li's burning eyes, he picked up his glass and drank. "Let's drink together. You know the moon dew of the Vast Moon Brew." The black-haired man in white smiled and poured a cup for Zhang Li. "Humph!" Zhang Li snorted. She did not touch the glass but picked up the wine pot and started drinking. The wine line emitted a strange fragrance in the air. Jian Wushuang, the black-haired man, and the white-robed man did not know whether to laugh or cry when they saw Zhang Li's bold and unrestrained manner. Then they picked up their wine glasses and took a sip. When the moon dew entered his throat, it turned into the sweetest wine thread that flowed through his internal organs. It was indescribably pleasant and comfortable. However, at the same time, the wine named Moon Dew was extremely strong. After drinking a cup, Jian Wushuang felt his immortal body burning. Jian Wushuang put down the wine cup and looked at the black-haired man and the white-robed man. He found that he had been watching him. Their eyes met, and the black-haired and white-robed man gave him a friendly smile. Jian Wushuang returned the greeting and continued to look straight ahead. "Good fellow, you're really strong." Yan Fan was not satisfied. He put down his glass and drank like Zhang Li. The black-haired man and the white-robed man did not want to fall behind either. They also picked up the wine pot and drank heartily. To Jian Wushuang's surprise, the gentle and charming Vast Moon Immortal Lord also changed her previous weak appearance. She lifted the wine pot and started to chant. Just like that, the originally tense situation turned into a drinking contest. Out of curiosity, Jian Wushuang tested the weight of the wine pot and could not help but click his tongue. There were thousands of things inside this jug, and the amount of wine stored in it was no less than 100,000 caddies. If these 100,000 caddies were to fall into his stomach, even a Grand Yen Immortal would be completely drunk. As time passed, Zhang Li threw down the wine pot first, but it was empty. How satisfying! Zhang Li did not look drunk at all. Satisfied, she sat back down. A moment later, Yan Fan, the black-haired and white-robed man, and the Vast Moon Immortal Lord all finished the wine in the jug one after another, and their faces were more or less tipsy. How have you been all these years? The black-haired man and the white-clothed man looked at Zhang Li and finally made up their minds. Who can be happy after being exiled here? Yan Fan and I have been in a deep sleep and rarely woke up until today, Zhang Li said slowly. The black-haired man and the white-robed man were silent. Then, he looked at Jian Wushuang and asked, "Who is this?" Before Zhang Li could say anything, Yan Fan said excitedly, "This is my disciple. He's a rare genius." As soon as he said that, Vast Moon Immortal Lord looked at Jian Wushuang with her beautiful eyes. She knew Yan Fan's pride very well. As an ultimate existence who had suppressed thousands of heavenly regions with a single sword in the ancient era, even the emperor wanted to recruit him. At that time, many heaven's favorites were eager to become his disciples, but he had never taken one in. Now that time had passed and they met again, Yan Fan had an additional disciple by his side. How could she not be surprised? When the black-haired and white-robed man heard this, he could not help but smile. "Oh, it seems like Brother Yan's taste is not bad. He is indeed a good seedling. However, it would be a little too much to call him a heaven's favorite. How can a heaven's favorite be a mere Yen Immortal?" The Immortal Palace fell silent. "Song Ting, what do you mean?" Zhang Li was displeased. "Nothing. I'm just correcting some problems," the black-haired and white-robed man said with a faint smile. Yan Fan, who was originally excited, also changed his expression. He looked at him and said meaningfully, "From what you said, it seems that you have accepted a true prodigy as your disciple?" The black-haired and white-robed man named Song Ting said calmly, "More or less. He has already comprehended his own sword Dao. It's only a matter of time before he becomes a sword immortal in the future." Yan Fan could not help but chuckle. "You're still like to joke as you were back then. Your disciple has become a sword immortal? Don't joke around. Only my disciple can become a sword immortal. Okay?" The Immortal Palace was silent. Song Ting looked at him and continued, "How about a competition? If you dare, then come." "Who's afraid of who?" Yan Fan said disdainfully. "Hurry up and ask your disciple to come out. We are in a hurry." As soon as he finished speaking, a black-robed figure walked out from the depths of the Immortal Palace. In this Immortal Palace that was all dressed in white, he seemed extremely out of place. The black-robed young man's expression was extremely calm. It was like a true sword that completely hid its edge, making it impossible for others to see through it. As he appeared, his originally calm gaze instantly locked onto Jian Wushuang. 3 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal. Zhang Li and Yan Fan finally understood why Song Ting was so confident. His disciple had already reached 3 revolutions. 3 revolutions was already a qualitative change, not to mention that he had comprehended his own sword Dao. Even if he faced a 6 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal, he had the strength to fight. "This is really a little troublesome," Yan Fan murmured in a low voice. Then, he quickly approached Jian Wushuang and said in a low voice, "Good disciple, the fate of my face is on you this time. It's all up to you." I'm afraid that's not a good idea. I don't really want to make a move," Jian Wushuang said with a bitter smile. "Good disciple, You must save me and ruthlessly slap this old thing in the face, Yan Fan said in a low voice, almost kneeling in front of Jian Wushuang. In the end, Jian Wushuang nodded and said, I'll give it a try. All right. Yan Fan was so delighted that he almost jumped onto the table. My disciple has already agreed. Let's get ready to start. Song Ting was stunned. He did not expect Yan Fan to accept the challenge instead of retreating. Are you crazy? Look clearly. My disciple is a 3 revolutions grand Yen Immortal. Just the pressure of the Yen power is enough to make your disciple unable to stand up. Yan Fan snorted. Cut the crap. Today, I'll show you what a real heaven's favorite is. Jian Wushuang stood up slowly. Zhongli pulled him and said in a low voice, Don't fight. If you feel uncomfortable, stop. Don't worry, it won't be a big problem. He smiled and stood in the center of the palace. Vast Moon Immortal Lord, who had intended to stop him, had no choice but to give up after seeing this. At the same time, she was also worried for Yan Fan. There had never been any suspense in the outcome of a Yen Immortal facing a 3 revolutions grand Yen Immortal since ancient times. There had never been a single Yen Immortal who had counterattacked. Even the most talented prodigies could not do it. Could it be that all the fixed thoughts of the past would be overturned today? Song Ting secretly gritted his teeth. This was an extremely unfair battle. Even if his disciple won, it would not be too glorious. After all, the gap between a grand Yen Immortal and a Yen Immortal was something that could not be made up for. Their eyes met, and the black-robed young man, who seemed to be hiding his sword, suddenly said, You are very powerful. You are different from all the swordsmen I have seen. Your sword intent is too pure, as if it has been tempered by real blood and fire. Upon hearing this, Jian Wushuang's calm state of mind could not help but ripple. To be able to guess Jian Wushuang's hidden characteristics in such a short period of time, he was definitely a terrifying existence. The Wushuang Sword Dao originated from the Divine Power Universe. It was the final Sword Dao that was activated by the old man guarding the Divine Tomb in the depths of the universe. Until today, it was still Jian Wushuang's strongest sword move. When the entire Sword Dao was completely integrated, he would immediately become a Sword Immortal. All of Jian Wushuang's sword intent came from the Wushuang Sword Dao. The Wushuang Sword Dao had indeed been tempered by blood and fire to reach its current state. The black-robed young man had guessed all of this at this moment, which made Jian Wushuang feel shocked and vigilant. After saying that, the black-robed young man gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, and his entire body's aura was completely restrained. He said in a deep voice, Therefore I will go all out. Don't think that I will lower my strength to fight you. I will not lower my strength in the slightest, including my strength Yen power realm. Jian Wushuang nodded and said calmly, Of course, I won't hide my strength. The black-robed youth said, Then let's begin. As he finished his last word, thousands of sword intents burst out from under his feet. The sword intent was like a rainbow, piercing through the heavens and the earth, causing the entire immortal palace to tremble. Immediately after, the vast moon Immortal Lord, who was sitting on the jade throne, waved her hand and sent down endless moonlight. It directly turned into a barrier that enveloped the two. With this barrier as the center, a martial arts field was formed, allowing them to fight freely without destroying the immortal palace. Song Ting, who had black hair and white clothes, could not help but reveal a satisfied expression when he saw this scene. His disciple was truly stunning. Just the sword intent he released formed a suppressive force, and he almost controlled the entire aura at the first moment. In a competition between swordsmen, the first moment of the sword attack was extremely important. The so-called momentum could already determine the outcome of the battle. Song Ting then looked at Yan Fan. Seeing that not only was he not worried, but he was also smiling at this scene, he could not help but feel angry. Even if they won this battle, it would be extremely disgraceful. Thinking of this, Song Ting could not help but sneer. You know that you're going to lose, but you still want to fight. As a master, you really don't care about your disciple's life and death. If my disciple had been more ruthless, I'm afraid there wouldn't have been a winner. Yan Fan's face turned cold instantly upon hearing that, but then he returned to normal. With your disciple's mediocre sword Dao, it's simply wishful thinking to think that you can injure my disciple severely. Oh, are you that confident? Song Ting said playfully. When have I ever been unconfident? When Yan Fan said this, he directly stepped on the document and said a shocking sentence arrogantly. If my disciple doesn't beat the shit out of your disciple today, then it'll be considered that your disciple is lucky today. Vulgar, too vulgar. The immortal palace was deathly silent. The corners of all the white-robed people's mouths twitched, including the eyes of the vast moon immortal lord who was sitting on the jade throne. Yan Fan, how dare you? Song Ting slammed the table made of the osmanthus tree into pieces. He straightened his body and his face was as dark as water. This was a blatant humiliation. If they were not in the immortal palace, he would have drawn his sword long ago. Yan Fan pursed his lips and said, I'm not being presumptuous. Why? Can't I tell the truth now? Are you that confident that your disciple will win? What? Don't tell me you think your disciple will win. Then how about we add some conditions? Song Ting tried his best to suppress his anger. What condition? Yan Fan raised his eyebrows and said. Song Ting said coldly, if my disciple wins, your sword Dao will belong to me. If your disciple wins, my sword Dao will belong to you. How about it? Before Yan Fan could say anything, the vast moon immortal lord, who was sitting on the jade throne, had already stopped him with a solemn expression. No, this condition is absolutely not allowed. I think this condition is not bad, but I have to add one more thing to this condition. Yan Fan smiled quietly. If my disciple wins, tell me the secret of how your disciple reached the grand Yen immortal realm. Song Ting was startled and his expression was slightly unnatural, but he eventually agreed. Once this condition was set, it could not be changed. Even if Vast Moon Immortal Lord was worried or angry, it was useless. The reason why she was worried and angry was because these two archenemies had actually gambled their respective sword Daos for this competition between their disciples. This was truly fatal. One had to know that after reaching the level of sword immortals or even quasi-sword immortals, the battle between them would determine the outcome of life and death in a hair's breadth. Often, just one attack was enough to determine life and death. As a sword immortal, once the origin sword Dao was completely known by an opponent who was evenly matched, there was only death waiting for him. These two seemingly ordinary conditions were betting on the life of a sword immortal and a quasi-sword immortal. This was the reason why Vast Moon Immortal Lord was so nervous. She had already made a decision in her heart. No matter what the final outcome was, she would not let the two of them reveal their sword Dao. Jian Wushuang and the black-robed young man, who were completely enveloped by the moonlight, did not hear the conversation outside at all. In their eyes and ears, there was only each other. At this moment, the aura that the black-robed young man revealed was completely different from the one he released earlier. It was thick and strong. It was as if Jian Wushuang was not facing a swordsman, but a sword, a broadsword without a blade or sheath. Next, he was even more certain of his thoughts. The black-robed youth drew a sword from his back. It was a pitch-black heavy sword. It could no longer be described as a sword. It could be described as a heavy ruler or even an iron plate. Without a blade, it was like a heavy ruler. Jian Wushuang's eyes were solemn. Those who could use such a heavy sword were all swordsmen who had practiced their sword principle to the peak. The heavy sword has no edge, and the skill is not good. Without the sword edge had more destructive power. Jian Wushuang was even sure that ordinary Yen immortal experts could not even withstand this attack. At this moment, the black-robed youth seemed to have completely fused with the heavy sword in his hand. His eyes had turned completely black. The greatest respect for you is to let you completely kneel before my sword strike. Jian Wushuang shrugged and an invisible sword appeared in his right hand. This was the materialization of the Wushuang sword Dao. Streaks of sword patterns were slowly circulating. Song Ting, who was watching this scene from afar, had a solemn look on his face. A formless, invisible sword. This kid was not simple. On the other hand, Yan Fan was extremely smug, his chin almost reaching the sky. He had once had a brief sword duel with Jian Wushuang. Although it was only 2 moves, he had felt the aura of the true sword principle. My disciple might be able to beat you, old thing, let alone your disciple who is not even as good as you. Yan Fan was proud of himself. In his current understanding, he had already placed Jian Wushuang and Cang Ting on the same level. He was no match for anyone below Sword Immortal. In the moonlight barrier, the black-robed young man took the lead to move at this moment. He held the heavy sword with both hands and his entire body was like a dim light, crushing toward Jian Wushuang. Clang! The battle of power. Jian Wushuang brazenly met the attack and the invisible sword in his hand directly blocked his heavy sword. The black-robed young man used every inch of meridians in his immortal body to twist the huge sword in his hand and smash it down again. Sparks were everywhere. Endless sword intent swept out and engulfed Jian Wushuang from all directions. At this moment, the black-robed young man seemed to be tempering his sword embryo. His sword hit Jian Wushuang's invisible sword again and again. The entire moonlight enchantment was covered by the overflowing sparks. Cang Ting's lips curled into a satisfied smile. It seemed that everything was set in stone. However, Yan Fan was not nervous because of this. Instead, he was still smiling as if he was not worried. On the contrary, the vast moon immortal lord was the most nervous, as if she was ready to stop the two at any time. Whispers began to spread from the originally quiet immortal palace. Who do you think will win? Is there a need to say? It's not like you haven't seen his sword Dao. Good heavens, even a few grand Yen immortals of the same realm could not get close to him. That's right, that Yen immortal definitely can't do it. It's already not easy for him to hold on until now. If he continues, he'll probably vomit blood. In the moonlight barrier, under the surging sword intent that filled the sky, the black-robed young man had completely entered the battle state. In just a few dozen breaths, he had swung out 90,000 sword strikes. However, what surprised him was that Jian Wushuang had withstood all 90,000 sword strikes. How was this possible? Have you swung enough? A voice rang out. The black-robed youth was startled. What? What responded to him was a powerful flying kick. Bang! With this kick, he flew back 1,000 feet and only managed to stop himself after a crack appeared in the moonlight barrier. Jian Wushuang withdrew his right foot and shook his wrist. If all you're gonna do is tickle me, I think we can finish this battle soon. What? The black-robed young man's body trembled. The 90,000 swords that he swung out with all his strength were actually just tickles in his eyes. You're courting death! He shouted and millions of sword intents burst out from his immortal body. Then, these million sword intents condensed into a huge treasure form behind him, almost bursting the entire moonlight barrier. Duangu sword Dao dash, as the black-robed young man shouted. The huge treasure form behind him also moved. It held a huge heavy sword in both hands and slashed down. Jian Wushuang, who stood rooted to the ground, felt that his head was covered. He had no way to dodge and could only meet the Duangu sword strike. At this moment, the selfless true shadow supported him. Jian Wushuang did not release the Wushuang sword Dao but used the flowing cloud grass sword style. As another sword principle, the entire flowing cloud grass sword style represented exuberance and exuberance. It could protect Jian Wushuang from any serious injuries to the greatest extent. Flowing cloud grass sword style, the 7th form. Folding grass and leaves. Boundless green sword intent rushed into the sky and turned into leaves that brazenly met the Duangu sword strike. At this moment, even the moonlight barrier began to crack. Good boy, you actually split this sword attack and didn't choose to fight it head-on. Yan Fan muttered in a low voice, his admiration apparent in his words. Cang Ting was also shocked. As a quasi-sword immortal, how could he not notice Jian Wushuang's intention? This was completely using the smallest price to break that lightning strike. The black-robed young man was defeated by this sword move. Tens of thousands of leaves brazenly met the attack. Then, under the gazes of all the grand Yen immortals, they calmly split apart the black-robed youth's Duangu sword strike. This scene was too dull yet too shocking. The black-robed youth did not even have time to react before his sword Dao treasure form was completely disintegrated. leaving no traces behind. The green sword intent also dissipated and was replaced by another sword intent, the Wushuang sword intent. Jian Wushuang stood with his hands behind his back. His sleeves fluttered in the wind and countless sword intents burst out from his feet. At this moment, he took the lead and slashed out with his sword. Wushuang sword Dao, Star River Lake Ocean sword intent. Second move. River. The majestic celestial river swept across the sky and tore apart the moonlight barrier set up by the vast moon Immortal Lord. Then, countless sword intents surged up and gathered together to form the most vast sword Dao river. At this moment, the entire Immortal Palace was completely shaken. All the white-robed men were extremely frightened and began to retreat subconsciously. They all felt an extremely strong threat. Song Ting and Vast Moon Immortal Lord both stood up, their eyes completely solemn. This kind of power actually made them feel uneasy. Ha ha! Yan Fan laughed and said loudly, "Awesome! Awesome! I get to see that sword move again." Zhang Li, who did not talk much, blushed. She was obviously eager to fight. This was Jian Wushuang's sword strike. The sword strike shook the Immortal Palace. At this moment, his body had completely disappeared, leaving only the vast river of swordsmanship flowing forward. There was only disbelief left in the black-robed young man's eyes. Facing such a powerful sword intent, he was actually unable to raise the will to resist. However, as the sword Dao celestial river got closer and closer, he finally gritted his teeth and raised the heavy sword in his hand to meet it. The clothes on the upper body of the black-robed young man instantly exploded, and his immortal body expanded several times. The heavy sword in his hand easily tore through the space and slashed at the sword Dao celestial river. Boom! An indescribable explosion exploded in the Immortal Palace, causing all the stars and the full moon to pale in comparison. The 100,000 swords of the heavy sword all slashed forward, but they only shattered the celestial river a little bit. Then, both the man and the sword were swallowed into the celestial river. It was as if the mountains and seas were about to collapse, leaving only the celestial river surging wildly. The Immortal Palace was like a lonely boat in the wild sea, swaying on the verge of collapse. The vast moon Immortal Lord released her yen power in succession to stabilize the Immortal Palace. Then, he looked at Yan Fan and said angrily, "Look at what your disciple has done." Yan Fan shrugged, then looked at Song Ting, whose face was ashen, and said smugly, "What do you think, Song Ting? Are you convinced?" Song Ting was still in shock and turned a deaf ear to Yan Fan's mockery. Jian Wushuang's sword attack was completely beyond his imagination. How could such a terrifying and unimaginable sword move be released by a puny swordsman? Even though he was a quasi-sword immortal, he wanted to go all out after seeing this sword move. And this sword naturally could not be unleashed by a swordsman, a puny little yen immortal. When the sword Dao celestial river completely hung above the entire celestial palace, it stopped flowing as if it had solidified. In the next moment, the sword Dao celestial river shattered with a loud bang, and endless streams of light scattered across the entire Immortal Palace. All the white-robed men looked at the ceiling of the Immortal Palace and were shocked again. Under the dome, as the sword Dao celestial river dissipated, two figures appeared. Jian Wushuang's expression was calm as if nothing had happened. However, his right arm was pressed against the black-robed young man's chest. The black-robed young man's exposed immortal body was covered in wounds. Drops of divine blood gushed out from the wounds, and it was difficult to stop them. He looked at Jian Wushuang in disbelief, his face ashen. If the finger pressing against his heart was a true sword, he would have died and his immortal body would have shattered. Time seemed to stop. Jian Wushuang withdrew his palm and landed on the ground of the Immortal Palace without saying a word. At this moment, all the people in white, Song Ting, and Vast Moon Immortal Lord looked at Jian Wushuang in disbelief. With the strength of a Yen Immortal, he easily defeated a 3 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal who went all out. This was beyond their imagination. Yan Fan hugged Jian Wushuang and laughed. "Amazing!" Song Ting sat back in his original spot, looking dejected. Then, The black-robed young man landed from the sky and looked at Jian Wushuang with a complicated expression. He seemed to be still immersed in that scene and had yet to recover from the lingering fear. He never thought that he would lose, and that he would lose without any leeway. How is it, Songting? Who won? Yan Fan turned to look at Songting, who was in a daze, and asked with a smile. Songting slowly raised his head and stared at him. After a while he said, I lost. I'll give you what you want now. After he finished speaking, he reached out and flipped his hand. Immediately, ancient and abstruse sword patterns came out of his palm. This was Songting's sword Dao. However, the sword Dao he released only appeared for a moment before it was immediately dispersed by a stream of yen power. Songting raised his head and looked at Yan Fan, who was smiling evilly, and was puzzled. All right. No matter what, we're still old friends who can live with our reputation. I don't want to copy your past. Besides, do you think I'm coveting your sword Dao? No matter what, I'm still a sword immortal. I just wanted to show off my disciple to you today. Yan Fan could not help but burst into laughter. Songting's expression changed several times, and in the end, there was only helplessness left. The vast moon immortal lord, who had rushed over, shook her head helplessly. The carefree middle-aged man in front of her seemed to have not changed at all. All right. We've drunk the wine, talked, and fought. We should go. Yan Fan waved his hand and said, We still have important matters to attend to, so we won't chat with you. Wait, are we leaving just like that? Songting said coldly, causing the entire immortal palace to fall into silence again. Then, he cleared his throat and said, Vast moon, don't keep the wine. Take out all the remaining moon dew. If you don't drink it today, don't even think about leaving. All right, don't send me off. We don't know when we'll meet again. It's as if we have a good relationship. Yan Fan waved his hand and said while standing on the square of the immortal palace. In order to avoid vast moon immortal lord's resentful and passionate gaze, he almost shrank behind Jian Wushuang. The vast moon immortal lord retracted her gaze and then came to Jian Wushuang, looking at him with the gaze of an elder. The corners of Jian Wushuang's mouth curled up unnaturally. Then the vast moon immortal lord reached out and pulled his right arm, placing something in his palm. You are his disciple, so this is my gift to you. In the future, when you are in a life or death situation, open it. In his palm, there was a full moon that was emitting a hazy moonlight. It was extremely beautiful. Jian Wushuang did not know whether to laugh or cry, but he did not refuse the goodwill of vast moon immortal lord. After thanking her, he solemnly put it into his arms. Songting and Yan Fan walked side by side at the front. You've taken in a good disciple whose future achievements will not be inferior to yours. It's only a matter of time before he becomes a sword immortal. Yan Fan smiled when he heard that. My goal isn't just to let him become a sword immortal. Perhaps he might advance to an even more unpredictable realm. You're that confident? Songting looked at him. Yan Fan sighed slightly and said, It's not that I'm confident, but he made me believe that his future will not settle at just a sword immortal. Do you know why I was so calm after he defeated your disciple? Why? Because I know that he can easily defeat your disciple and even kill him in an instant. It's also because I didn't set the bar for him as your disciple, but you. Even with Songting's composure, he was shocked after hearing such shocking words. Do you know what you're saying? I'm a 9 revolutions grand yen immortal, only a hair's breadth away from becoming a sword immortal. Even if I'm not your match, I'm definitely not that far off. Yan Fan sighed again. I know, but I still won't change my mind because I've already discussed sword principle with him before this. He blocked my sword strike, and he did it effortlessly. Songting took a deep breath. Is what you said true? Although I don't tell the truth much, this sentence is absolutely true. Songting sighed faintly. If that's the case, I can't guess where his future will be. We can't see that far. The only thing we can do is to act as guides. Yan Fan looked into the distance with a myriad of thoughts. Oh right, you old brat, you still haven't told me what's going on with your disciple's realm. At that time, I could tell at a glance that he consumed something to advance to the grand Yen Immortal. Song Ting smiled. As expected, nothing can escape your eyes. That's right. I did feed him a fruit that contains great fate energy. What? Yen Fan was completely shocked. Damn. What kind of fruit is so heaven-defying that it can help you break through cultivation realms? He looked proud. I'll call it the Chaos Origin Sealess Fruit for now. Chaos Origin Sealess Fruit? What a weird name. It sounds so cheap. Cough, watch your words. I came up with that name myself. I knew it was you, you old scoundrel. You clearly have no sense of style, yet you insist on pretending to be profound and mysterious, giving it such a bizarre name that lowers the overall standard. Damn it. I'm done talking. No, go on. Let me see if you can get a few hundred of those fruits for my disciple to taste. Do you think they're clay pills? You want a few hundred to taste? Those fruits that contain unparalleled luck and fate energy. Even if you reach the heavens, you might only get one. After learning that the so-called Chaos Origin Sealess Fruit was born in a place called Sealess Domain, Yen Fan became very interested. After getting the real address of the Sealess Domain, he hurriedly took Jian Wushuang and prepared to go to the Sealess Domain. Remember, the Sealess Domain is a little strange. When I brought my disciple in, I was almost trapped. However, with the two of you sword immortals as my guarantor, there should be no major problems. Song Ting's gaze was solemn as he instructed. Yen Fan waved his hand. Got it. I'll definitely be careful. Just as he was about to leave the Sui-Yu Immortal Palace, a figure suddenly ran out of the palace, his expression nervous and determined. Looking at the figure that was about to leave, the young man in black said in a clear voice, "May I ask your name? I want to remember it and fight you again in the future." Jian Wushuang stopped where he was and the corners of his mouth curled up. Jian Wushuang. The three figures were like stars flowing in the sky. They came and left in a hurry, and in the blink of an eye, they disappeared into the boundless, endless sea. Jian Wushuang, I'll remember it. The black-robed youth murmured. His gaze was firm. Song Ting put away his disappointed expression and looked at his disciple. His pride revealed without any concealment. My disciples aren't any worse. I really want to see how far they'll grow. At this moment, the hazy moonlight that could not be looked at directly on the body of the vast moon immortal lord was gone, and there was a sense of loneliness. Her thoughts seemed to have returned to the ancient times. Sometimes endless lifespan was not necessarily a good thing for the Yen Immortal. After experiencing countless ancient wars and the void, they began to think about the ultimate meaning of their existence. There had been no news about Di Qing since he left the Gui-Yu Immortal Palace. Although it had only been a short time, Jian Wushuang became even more worried. One had to know that the longer the timeline was, the greater the possibility of finding Di Qing. This was because the entire boundless ocean had no boundaries and was almost equivalent to a universe. The difficulty of finding a grand Yen Immortal in such a universe filled with fatal dangers could be imagined. Originally, Jian Wushuang wanted to continue searching for Di Qing aimlessly, but Yen Fan led him directly to the Sealess Domain. Good disciple, just follow us. I spent a lot of money to get this information from that old brat Song Ting. I guarantee that you will become a grand Yen Immortal after eating that Chaos Origin Sealess Fruit. Jian Wushuang felt helpless as he looked at Yen Fan, who was beaming with joy and excitement. From the Yen Immortal stage to the Grand Yen Immortal stage, it was an extremely difficult and almost impossible task. How could there be some kind of fruit that contained great fate energy that could have such an unimaginable heaven-defying effect? One had to know that even Emperor Liu Ye's imperial treasures did not have such a supreme treasure. Therefore, Jian Wushuang did not have much hope and confidence. Sealess Domain, there's actually a place in the endless sea that isn't a sea area. Could it be that this old brat is fooling me again? As he continued to move forward, Yen Fan began to doubt the true location that Song Ting had given him. Of course, Zhang Li said. You have to know that there is something in the endless sea that won't sink into the sea and won't be devoured by any Yen power. You mean the corpse of the Yen Immortal? Yen Fan touched his chin. If that's the case, then the Chaos Origin Sealess fruit might really be born in that place. What kind of name is that? Zhongli pouted. What a weird name. Yan Fan touched his nose. I think it's quite weird too. But as long as I can advance to the Grand Yen Immortal stage, it'll be a good outcome. Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly when he heard that. He knew his own situation the best. He had long realized that without the immortal source, it was almost impossible for him to reach the Grand Yen Immortal stage. This was also the reason why he was unable to advance to the Grand Yen Immortal stage, even though he was extremely proficient in using the immortal style and had comprehended the strongest sword technique. Without the immortal source, Jian Wushuang's path of advancement was completely blocked. However, he still held onto the last glimmer of hope. If the Chaos Origin Sealess fruit could really allow him to ascend to the Grand Yen Immortal stage, he would be able to easily crush a 6 Revolutions Grand Yen Immortal. Therefore, he was looking forward to it. With 2 true sword immortals following them, they traveled 10,000 miles in an instant. They traveled at a speed that could cross an entire heavenly region in a few breaths. Even so, it still took a long time to reach the sealess domain. When the endless Black Sea area was replaced by a gray-white land plain, even Jian Wushuang could not help but be surprised. What formed the grayish-white land plain was a mess of bones. The endless skeletons were shrouded in a unique desolate and deathly aura that made one's heart palpitate involuntarily. This was simply a scene that could only be left behind after a great battle. The land plain formed by the endless skeletons of the Yen Immortals was even vaster than the heavenly continent plane that Bianziyuan was in. When Yan Fan saw this scene, he could not help but click his tongue. Good heavens! How many Yen Immortals died to form this place? It's really magnificent. Be careful. I'm afraid there are living things here. Zhongli frowned. Are you sure the Chaos Origin Sealess fruit is here? Yan Fan nodded affirmatively and pointed ahead. It's definitely here. Look here. There's no longer any restraint of the Order Heavenly Tao. The Yen power is in a chaotic and unknown state, which is quite in line with the meaning of the origin. That old boy Congting's summary is not bad. Looking around, Jian Wushuang soon felt that what Yan Fan said was reasonable. The land formed by the bones of countless Yen Immortals was a land of chaos without the Order of Heavenly Tao. Let's go. Let's find that fruit first. This small corpse ground is nothing. Yan Fan said and flew toward the sealess domain. Walk behind me. No matter what danger you encounter, don't make a move. Let's go. Zhongli said and walked ahead. Jian Wushuang nodded and covered his body with his Yen power before stepping into the sealess domain. As soon as he stepped into it, an unknown and chaotic Yen power came over. The saber-like Yen power kept cutting the derivative energy on the surface of his immortal body, making Jian Wushuang feel slightly uncomfortable. Zhongli noticed his discomfort, so she dispelled the chaotic Yen power around Jian Wushuang and formed a barrier around him with his sword intent. Thank you. Jian Wushuang thanked him solemnly. Zhongli raised his eyebrows and smiled. Remember to call me mistress from today onwards. Then, before he could react, Zhongli turned around and walked forward. Rubbing his nose, Jian Wushuang followed suit. The endless remains of the Yen Immortal under his feet had disappeared for an unknown period of time. There was no longer any immortal aura. It was filled with silence and desolation. As far as the eye could see, there were only the remains of the Yen Immortal. Other than that, there was no other living aura. But the more so, the more vigilant he had to be. This was an irrefutable principle. Yan Fan walked at the forefront, carefree as always, seemingly unconcerned about any danger. However, there was one detail that caught Jian Wushuang's attention. Even the remains of the Yen Immortal under his feet did not suffer any external injuries and were preserved perfectly. One had to know that this was practically an impossible thing in the Endless Sea. If he wanted to build a continent in the Endless Sea, he would have to kill the Yen Immortals and use their bones to form the land for the continent. This naturally could not avoid conflict. As long as there was conflict, the skeleton would be incomplete. However, from the looks of it, these skeletons were too complete, as if they had died voluntarily. Jian Wushuang felt that something was wrong, but he did not know what it was. Strange. Why don't I feel the aura of that fruit? Yan Fan asked doubtfully with a dark chin. They had been in this sealess domain for a long time. If there were fruits with such extraordinary effects, it would be impossible to hide their aura. That was the reason behind Yan Fan's perplexity. However, not long after he said this, an unimaginably dense aura followed. The rich aura contained an unimaginable amount of fate energy, which made Jian Wushuang unable to remain calm. Good heavens, it's right ahead. Yan Fan was overjoyed. That old fellow Tsang Ting didn't lie to me. Disciple, hurry up and take the fruit as soon as possible. Jian Wushuang nodded and sped forward without any hesitation. Regardless of the outcome, he had to grasp this opportunity. After all, he had no way to break through to the Grand Yen Immortal realm. He could not give up any chance. When they arrived at the center of the entire sealess domain, they finally saw the object that contained the supreme aura of great fate energy. It was an unimaginably huge tree that towered into the sky. Its brown branches and emerald green canopy were even larger than the immortal osmanthus tree that had supported the entire Guiyu Immortal Palace. The supreme great fate energy that was so dense that it almost could not be dispersed flowed out from the towering giant tree. Good heavens, it seems that there is more than one fruit on this immortal tree, Yan Fan said with a smile. He seemed to be extremely satisfied. Then, he looked at Jian Wushuang and raised his eyebrows. Disciple, I'll pick a few hundred for you to try. Without waiting for Jian Wushuang's reply, Yan Fan's body flashed and he flew forward. Jian Wushuang felt even more uneasy. As if to confirm his thoughts, when Yan Fan rushed to the front of the immortal tree, the Yen Immortal Remains under his feet suddenly shook. Then, the Immortal Remains land split open instantly, and thousands of extremely huge tree roots drilled out from the earth's core. Each root was so huge that even a true dragon could not compare to it. These tree roots immediately surrounded Yan Fan. However, Zhongli seemed to have predicted it and suddenly drew her sword. This was the first time Jian Wushuang saw Zhongli attack in front of the Guiyu Immortal Palace. Although it was only one attack, it shocked all the Grand Yen Immortals. This time, Zhongli drew a sword from her waist and slashed forward. Although it was only one attack, it instantly split into thousands of sword intents. Each of them was a powerful sword intent. Nearly 1,000 sword intents slashed forward, instantly cutting the giant tree root into pieces. Yan Fan had already reacted. He reached out and crushed the remaining tree roots with a finger. But then, an even more majestic force burst out from the immortal tree, forcing Yan Fan to retreat. Those who covet my Tao fruit shall die. A heaven-shaking sound came from the immortal tree. Then, the branches split open, revealing a huge mouth. Jian Wushuang was slightly shocked when he saw this. The immortal tree that was nourished by countless Yen immortal skeletons had produced an unimaginable power. This kind of power even surpassed the might of a 6 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal. It had the might of a 9 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal. Yan Fan smacked his lips. Good lord. I was wondering why Tsang Ting advised me to be vigilant. It turns out that this strange tree has already reached 9 revolutions. You're scared. Zhongli pouted. Would I be scared? I'm a sword immortal. All right. Yan Fan was furious. How dare you look down on me? Zhongli raised her head and pointed at the immortal giant tree in front of her. Go chop it down and prove yourself in front of me and my disciple. All right, Zhongli, just you wait. Yan Fan was filled with hatred, and then he rushed forward angrily. Those who covet my Tao fruit shall die. The immortal giant tree made another earth-shaking sound, then twisted its roots that were even bigger than a true dragon and smashed them at Yan Fan. Yan Fan, who was furious, did not draw his sword. Instead, he pointed out with his finger. In an instant, thousands of sword intents shot out, easily crushing the tree roots into powder. Are you planning to hand it over yourself? Or do you want to find it yourself after I cut you in half? Yan Fan said coldly. The giant immortal tree that had its roots cut off seemed to have tasted the pain. The crown that was so huge that it connected to the sky began to tremble. However, it also seemed to be extremely angry. The huge mouth on the branch said crazily, Today, even if I die, I will not hand over a single Dao fruit. I will turn all of you into nourishment. How noisy! Yan Fan pricked his ears and then rushed forward. What followed was an extremely shocking scene. A battle that was almost one-sided and without any suspense began. Facing a true sword immortal, a 9 revolutions grand Yen immortal, this immortal giant tree was destined to be a huge sandbag. Broken tree roots, broken tree crowns, and almost non-stop wails spread in the center of the entire immortal remains land. Jian Wushuang could not bear to watch the fight until the end. The immortal giant tree's fate was truly tragic, but it was indeed tough. Other than wailing, it did not even beg for mercy. Just as Yan Fan was about to chop off the giant immortal tree's waist, a feeble but extremely terrified voice rang out. Don't fight anymore. I'll give it to you. I'll give it all to you. Why didn't you say so earlier? You insisted that I tear you apart before handing them over. Yan Fan muttered in dissatisfaction and then withdrew his palm. Hurry up and take out as many as you have. Give me 180 of them. If you dare to give me one, I'll definitely tear you apart today. The giant immortal tree was on the verge of death. When it heard this, it immediately wailed, 180 fruits. Do you think they are clay balls? This is a Dao fruit that I bear. I can only produce one every 1 Hua year. He scratched his head when he heard that. Then hand over all of it. My disciple is going to advance today. If he succeeds, you'll get a lot of benefits. I only have 2 left. Even if you destroy me today, I only have 2 left, the immortal giant tree said with its last breath. Yan Fan could not be bothered to listen to its nonsense and kept waving his hands. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang and Zhongli looked at each other and then jumped over. Then, under Yan Fan's miraculous strength, the immortal giant tree was forced to spit out 2 palm-sized fruits. The moment the jade-green fruit appeared, the space within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles was filled with an unimaginable fate energy. This kind of fate energy actually began to slowly construct the laws of the heavenly Tao when it scattered in the air. Strands of ancient Shen glyphs quietly flowed in the air, causing the desolate and deathly aura to dissipate without a trace. Swallow it, Yan Fan and Zhongli said at the same time. Jian Wushuang, who had wanted to decline, could only be thick-skinned and take a fate energy fruit and swallow it. In the next moment, the fate energy fruit transformed into thousands of rays of light that flowed down his throat and into his limbs. NGH, an extremely tyrannical fate energy suddenly broke through all the obstacles in his meridians and began to circulate repeatedly. At the same time, wisps of divine blood burst out from every pore of his immortal body. In an instant, a bloody mist spread out. Jian Wushuang hurriedly sat cross-legged to digest and absorb the fate energy in his body. Seeing this scene, Yan Fan could not help but smile. Not bad. It seems that advancing to the Grand Yen Immortal stage is already a sure thing. Zhongli nodded. They thought highly of Jian Wushuang's talent. It did not matter whether he had the fate energy fruit or not. They believed that Jian Wushuang would definitely reach the Grand Yen Immortal stage in less than a Hua year. This fate energy fruit was just a matter of bringing forward the established facts. Seeing Jian Wushuang's aura circulating and all kinds of great Dao aura circulating, Zhongli and Yan Fan did not stay idle either. Together, they set up a barrier to guide the fate energy in the other fruit to him. The fate energy in this fruit was too abundant, so much so that even the undying and imperishable immortal body was struggling. At this moment, Jian Wushuang's divine thoughts merged into one and guided the fate energy in his limbs and bones to attack the non-existent obstacle together. Time passed bit by bit, and the fate energy that shook the 9 heavens began to return to his body. Then all the phenomena disappeared. Yan Fan, who was nervously watching this scene, was slightly stunned. Are you done? Zhongli frowned. She did not understand. A moment later, Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes and a hint of disappointment flashed across his eyes. Yan Fan asked nervously, How is it? He shook his head with a bitter smile. It still failed. Motherfucker. I knew that old bastard Song Ting couldn't be relied on. I'm going to uproot this tree right now, Yan Fan said angrily. Then he turned around and was about to uproot the tree. What does it have to do with me? I can only provide him with fruits, but I can't guarantee that he will be able to steadily improve. The immortal giant tree trembled, almost turning into a ball. At this moment, Jian Wushuang stopped Yan Fan. It's indeed not related to the tree. That fruit does contain great fate energy that can improve almost anyone. But it's because of me. But he wanted to say something but hesitated. In the end, he said, "It's fine. Perhaps I'll break through after eating a few more fruits." When the immortal giant tree heard this, it hurriedly said in a low voice, "I've already given my last 2 to you. I don't have any more." Yan Fan snorted coldly. "It's not up to you to decide whether or not there's anything. It's up to me." The giant immortal tree sighed and then said angrily, "I live in a corner and only want to comprehend the Tao in peace and bear the Tao fruit. Why do you always want to snatch my Tao fruit? You're just a tree. Why are you so emotional?" Yan Fan pursed his lips. "Give me 5 more fruits and we'll leave." "How can I have so many fruits? Other than you, another supreme expert came not long ago and injured me. He took a Tao fruit from me, including the 2 fruits in your hands. This is all I have." The giant immortal tree said sadly. After letting out a long sigh, it did not say anything else. Jian Wushuang, who was standing at the side, suddenly realized something and looked up at the immortal giant tree. "What did you just say? Not long ago, other Grand Yen immortals came to your place? What did he look like? Was it because his eyes were golden and there were 9 colorful feathers on his hair?" After a moment of silence, the immortal giant tree spoke again. "How did you know? Could it be that you are his accomplices?" The divine thoughts in Jian Wushuang's mind sounded like thunder, and his heart beat like a drum. What he had just described was Di Qing's appearance. Now that he had accidentally found out about Di Qing's whereabouts, how could he not be excited? "Then quickly tell me, where is he now?" Jian Wushuang asked anxiously. "I don't know, but I can sense that he hasn't gone far. Other than that, I don't know anything else," the immortal giant tree said, and then kept silent. He stopped asking and started to think quickly. The information he got from the immortal giant tree proved that Di Qing had been here not long ago. At that time, Jian Wushuang and the others were probably still in the heavenly continent plane. There was no less than half a year between them, but with Di Qing's strength as a 9 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal, he would definitely be able to walk a considerable distance. However, the giant immortal tree could sense that Di Qing had not gone far away. This meant that Di Qing must have been severely injured and had found a safe place to hide. Thinking of this, Jian Wushuang no longer hesitated. He turned around and prepared to look for Di Qing's whereabouts. "How is it? Do you know where your friend is?" Yan Fan asked solemnly. He nodded. "It's very likely that he's nearby and hasn't left yet. I have to find him as soon as possible to prevent any more trouble." Yan Fan nodded. "All right, we'll follow you and ensure your safety." After leaving the land of immortal bones in the sealess domain, Jian Wushuang sighed in disappointment. After consuming a Chaos Origin sealess fruit, he did not have any breakthrough in his realm at all. The supreme fate energy contained in the Tao fruit was only divided and absorbed by the 3 great Tao. Could not break through the realm at all. In other words, Jian Wushuang could no longer break through. The Yen immortal realm was his final destiny. Without an immortal source, he had no chance of advancing. The highest level he could reach in the future would be the Yen immortal. This was undoubtedly fatal. Even if Jian Wushuang could kill a 3 revolutions Grand Immortal or even a 6 revolutions Grand Immortal with his 3 great Taos, it did not change the problem of his upper limit. The highest limit was the Yen Immortal. In the future, when facing a 9 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal, he would only be easily killed. Could it be that there is really no way to change this? The Tao fruit that the immortal giant tree bore contained a terrifying amount of fate energy, enough to allow a Yen Immortal to reach the Grand Yen Immortal stage. It was precisely because of this that Jian Wushuang became even more worried. He could not believe that he was stuck at the Yen Immortal stage and could not break through. The Grand Yen Immortal stage was already within his reach. Perhaps he saw the disappointment in Jian Wushuang's eyes. Yan Fan patted his shoulder and said, This must be the problem with the stupid fruit. I still think highly of you. You will definitely become a Grand Yen Immortal in less than a Hua year. Back then, it took Zhongli and I a long time to advance to the Grand Yen Immortal realm. After all, it's not that easy. Zhongli raised her eyebrows and smiled. Yen Fan is right. You'll reach the Grand Yen Immortal realm in at most 1 Hua year because you're much better than us. Immediately after, Yen Fan stuffed the last Fate Energy Dao fruit to him. Today was indeed too rushed. In the future, if there are signs of a breakthrough, eat this fruit. You will definitely be able to break through in one go. Looking at the Dao fruit in his hand that was completely wrapped by the Yen power and did not have any Fate energy overflowing, Jian Wushuang felt extremely warm in his heart. Then, he cupped his hands and thanked him solemnly. All right. From now on, you can't be so polite to us anymore. These are all your duties as a master. Yen Fan was still smiling as he said, the most important thing now is to find your friend. He nodded, and then the three of them flew towards the endless sea. The so-called endless sea was said to be endless. Even Grand Yen Immortals could get lost in it, and the difficulty of finding a Grand Yen Immortal in it could be imagined. With the perception of the immortal giant tree, it would probably take a long time to find Di Qing. However, Jian Wushuang still decided to find Di Qing no matter how long it would take. After all, Di Qing was exiled to the endless sea because of him. As they continued forward, the endless sea returned to its dead silence and coldness. Jian Wushuang was thinking about some problems as he moved forward. It had been a long time since he entered the endless sea. Although he had experienced several bloody battles, he still felt that not all Grand Yen Immortals who were trapped in the endless sea did not seem to be as evil as he had imagined. It could even be said that it was impossible for him to be exiled. This was especially true for the two Sword Immortals, Zhongli and Yen Fan, as well as the Vast Moon Immortal Lord and Songting Immortal Lord of the Guei Yu Immortal Palace, as well as a white-robed Great Yen Immortal. They did not have bloodthirsty ruthlessness on them, only purity. These supreme experts who had transcended the true shackles and could even compete for the fate of the emperors were now exiled to the endless sea. Jian Wushuang guessed that it was highly possible that Jin Wuyang had led the exiles after he ascended to the position of emperor. Just as he could not help but want to ask some questions, a murderous intent suddenly swept across the endless sea in the distance. Yen Fan frowned. They're really a bunch of damn fellows. Has the endless sea become so chaotic while I'm asleep? You've slept for so many years. This place is more chaotic than you think. Then we might as well kill them all. Out of sight, out of mind, he said again, his hand already quietly grasping the hilt of his sword at his waist. In just a short moment, the murderous aura swept over. A total of 20 figures were like pitch-black flowing lights. These figures were all chasing after the figure at the front. A moment later, a voice that was almost scared out of his wits came from afar. Hero in front. Save me. Jian Wushuang's eyes narrowed slightly, and he had already gathered a majestic yen power in his palm. As the voice rang out, a skinny figure wearing a sloppy Taoist robe appeared behind Jian Wushuang in an instant, and then disappeared mysteriously. The remaining 20-plus figures surrounded by terrifying yen power stopped in front of them. Each of them was a 3 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal. Hand over the evil thief, the leader of the Grand Yen Immortals said coldly. He released his yen power and surrounded Jian Wushuang and the other two. If you don't hand him over, don't blame us for being rude. Jian Wushuang shook his head and sighed. He did not say anything else. If these Grand Yen Immortals had asked nicely in the beginning, they might really know the whereabouts of that fellow. But now what awaited them was only death. Yen Fan did not even bother to pull out his sword. He waved his hand casually, and hundreds of powerful sword intents surged out and shredded them into pieces. From the moment he opened his mouth to the moment he was crushed into minced meat, it only took a few breaths. After the sword intent returned to one, Yen Fan said coldly, "So noisy." His decisiveness in dealing with enemies or potential disadvantages was far beyond Jian Wushuang's imagination. However, the strongest person who could survive until now in that ancient era probably no longer had a soft heart. He waved his hand and crushed more than 23 revolutions Grand Yen Immortals into powder. Yan Fan then looked at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang said coldly, "If you continue to hide, you won't end up better than them." After a moment of silence, a voice that could not suppress its fear suddenly sounded. "Please spare my life, immortal lords. I, Jiang Yoxing, would like to thank you for your kindness." The space rippled and the figure that had disappeared knelt in front of Jian Wushuang. He prostrated himself and trembled. Seeing this scene, Jian Wushuang, who had already had the intention to kill, did not flare up. Instead, he said coldly, "Why did you lure trouble to us? Aren't you afraid that we will kill you as well?" The sloppy Taoist, who called himself Old Taoist Jiang Yoxing, trembled and wailed. "The three immortal lords may not know this, but I was forced into a corner. I had no choice but to seek protection from you. If the three immortal lords are still extremely angry, you can kill me at any time." Jian Wushuang, Zhang Li and Yan Fan looked at each other and said coldly, "Leave." "Thank you, three immortal lords." The sloppy Taoist bowed deeply, then crawled up from the void, his face filled with gratitude. It was not until then that Jian Wushuang saw the old Taoist's face clearly. His disheveled and withered hair was casually tied behind his head by a bone hairpin, revealing a sunken and dry yellow face. His two mustaches made him look even more wretched. Under the open robe, Jian Wushuang could see a pair of skinny bones. He wondered how this guy had survived until now. Yan Fan pursed his lips and turned around to leave. Just as they were about to leave, old Taoist Jiang Yoxing, who had no intention of leaving, suddenly said, "Three immortal lords, do you have something to do? If you don't want to die, leave on your own." Jian Wushuang left without turning his head. Old Taoist Jiang Yoxing seemed to be hesitating about something. After a moment, he gritted his teeth and said, "Three immortal lords, I have been traveling here for several years and am familiar with any place. If there is a need, I am willing to follow you." Jian Wushuang stopped quietly. In the next moment, 36,000 sword intents burst out from his body and directly attacked Jiang Yoxing. Looking at the terrifying sword intents that were coming at him from all directions, old Taoist Jiang Xianxia didn't flee in a panic. Instead, he closed his eyes and remained motionless. Heaven and earth shook, and waves rose in the endless sea. Time seemed to stop. The 36,000 sword intents did not slash at Jiang Yoxing at this moment. Instead, they hovered in front of him. Then, the thousands of sword intents merged into one. Jian Wushuang came in front of him, grabbed the collar of his robe, and lifted him up. "What is your motive?" I don't have a motive. I just want to repay the three immortal lords for saving my life. There's no need. If you say another word of nonsense, the sword will cut you." Jian Wushuang said coldly and threw him away. Jiang Xian was speechless. In the end, he muttered, "But Jian Wushuang, who was about to turn around and leave, stopped and said in a low voice, "How confident are you in finding a grand yen immortal in the endless sea?" He was startled and quickly reacted. "Immortal Lord, it's very difficult, but if the conditions are set in this area, it shouldn't be a particularly difficult thing. Because there aren't many places for yen immortals to stay here, and I happen to know all of them." "Who are you looking for?" Jian Wushuang ignored him. "Don't ask about things you shouldn't know about. Come with us." Above the boundless sea, the sloppy old man, Jiang Yoxing, followed closely behind Jian Wushuang and the other two. At the same time, he took out something from his tattered Taoist robe and threw it on the surface of the sea. In an instant, it expanded by 300 meters in the wind and formed a true treasure ship. Three immortal lords board the true ship first. In order to avoid some blind grand yen immortals disturbing the journey, traveling by ship is the best choice. Jian Wushuang did not hesitate and boarded the ship with Zhang Li and Yan Fan. In the blink of an eye, the true ship traveled 1,000,000 miles at an extremely fast speed. Jiang Yoxing sat at the bow of the ship and focused on controlling the direction. Jian Wushuang walked forward and asked, "Have you ever seen a 9 revolutions grand yen immortal who was injured in this heavenly region and had 9 colorful feathers in his hair?" "I've never seen him before, but the next sea area we reach should have the person the immortal lord wants to find." Jiang Yoxing said straightforwardly. Jian Wushuang was not too disappointed. After all, the news about Di Qing was too sparse in this endless sea. There's no need to be anxious. If your friend is injured, he shouldn't be too far away from here. Maybe he can be found in the next place. Yan Fan patted his shoulder and comforted him. Jian Wushuang nodded. Since things had come to this, he could only follow Jiang Yoxing's lead and go search. However, after traveling out of the vast sea realm, Jiang Yoxing, who was concentrating on controlling the real ship, suddenly changed his expression. Not good. There's a change ahead. As soon as he finished speaking, the extremely vast seaplane suddenly shook, as if a terrifying existence under the sea had awakened. Billions of feet of dust surged up, like a heavenly gate rising from the sea. It was terrifying to the extreme. An unimaginable pressure pressed down on the ship, and the sea gate formed by billions of feet of dust completely surrounded the true ship. At this moment, even the sky dimmed. Standing at the bow of the ship, Zhang Li and Yan Fan looked solemn. Their hands had already gripped the hilts of their swords. How could such a strange phenomenon appear? Could there be a Yen immortal controlling this sea area? Yan Fan muttered to himself as he looked at Jiang Yoxing, who was sitting at the bow of the boat. However, he quickly denied that it was Jiang Yoxing who was causing trouble. After all, a mere 6 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal could not cause such a huge commotion. At this moment, Jiang Yoxing also said in a trembling voice, "Immortals, what should we do next?" Yan Fan ignored him and looked at Jian Wushuang. "Follow behind us later. Remember not to get into the sea." Jian Wushuang nodded and an invisible force quietly gathered around him. At this moment, Zhang Li and Yan Fan were all ready to slash through the sea curtain. There was almost no way to dodge the trillion-meter-tall heavenly gate sea curtain. He could only choose to take it head-on. While they were all extremely solemn, only old Taoist Jiang Yoxing, who was lying on the bow of the ship, showed an unusually calm expression. From all directions, the heavenly gate sea curtain, which was hundreds of millions of feet tall, smashed down at this moment. It was as if the mountains and seas were about to collapse. The extremely terrifying force was like facing the siege of thousands of Grand Yen Immortals. Jian Wushuang did not dare to slack off at all. However, the next moment something unexpected happened. Jiang Yoxing, who was lying on the boat, suddenly pounced on him and shouted, "Something has happened in the endless sea. None of us can escape." It was not until this moment that Jian Wushuang suddenly realized that this terrifying and strange scene was not real, but an illusion. Such an all-encompassing illusionary realm actually deceived all of them. "You old dog! I won't forgive you." Jian Wushuang was extremely furious. However, no matter how furious his voice sounded, it was still swallowed by the thunderous roar. Rumble! Amidst the billions of feet of dust, the heaven gate sea curtain crashed down. In the next moment, the terrifying scene that he had expected did not appear. The moment the heaven gate sea curtain that was hundreds of millions of feet tall smashed down, it disappeared. Everything was like a mirage, like a dream, as if nothing had happened. Only the mist that was formed by the dust waves gushed over, filled with the aura of death and desolation. Jian Wushuang put down his palm and looked ahead. The sea was calm and dead silent. The terrifying scene from before was no longer there. "Damn it! It's actually an illusion?" Yan Fan said in a deep voice, his eyes cold. "What?" Zhang Li's face was solemn. The 2 sword immortals were also confused by the illusion. Jian Wushuang looked back at the ship. However, other than the 3 of them, there was no one else on the ship. The sloppy old man, Jiang Yoxing, had disappeared without a trace. It was as if he had never appeared. "Damned old thing, he triggered this illusion," Yan Fan said hatefully. "I've long sensed that something was wrong with him." Jian Wushuang was puzzled. But why did he do that? Why was he willing to take the risk? What's wrong? Zhang Li seemed to remember something, and his face changed. "Look at your stuff. Is there anything missing?" Jian Wushuang was stunned. Then he subconsciously touched his waist. The Boyong bottle, which contained the 3 emperors' true shadows, was still there. Not only was the Boyong bottle still there, But the golden jade ring and the other treasures were also there. They were all lying quietly in his arms. Everything is still here. What is this guy planning? Jian Wushuang murmured in a low voice. Suddenly, he thought of something and hurriedly touched his chest again. A moment later, he smiled bitterly and shook his head. The fate energy Dao fruit is gone. It must have been taken away by that old fellow. What? The Dao fruit was stolen? Yan Fan's eyes widened. I want this old thing's life. Jian Wushuang stopped him. This guy's whereabouts are strange. Obviously, he had already set his eyes on the Dao fruit on me. That's why he set up such an illusion to lure us into the trap. If we chase after him and get confused by the illusion again, we'll lose a lot. It's fine if a mere fate energy Dao fruit is gone. I have other ways. Yan Fan gritted his teeth secretly. That may be the case, but I've been tricked by this old thing. It's really damaging to my dignity as a sword immortal. If I find him, I'll grind his bones into ashes. As he spoke, he punched the edge of the true treasure ship again. With a ripping sound, the hull of the ship was torn apart. Damn it! This boat is actually made of paper? Yan Fan left the paper boat in a somewhat disheveled manner. He was so embarrassed and angry that he almost wanted to turn the entire sea upside down and capture the sloppy old man. Jian Wushuang, who was tricked by the sloppy old man's illusion, was extremely depressed. It was a great loss to have a fate energy Dao fruit stolen. Everything that had happened was ultimately because he had trusted the Grand Yen Immortal in the Endless Sea too much. No matter what, Zhang Yoxing had taught him a lesson. After calming down, the three of them once again rushed forward. Not long after, a heavenly continent plane that was also constructed from the remains of the Yen Immortals appeared. This heavenly continent was much smaller than the previous heavenly continent, but it was different from the other barren heavenly continent plains. There was an immortal tree growing on the land here. The immortal trees that were as dense as a forest emitted a strange and calm aura. How is it? Do you want to go in and take a look? Yan Fan asked. Jian Wushuang nodded without any hesitation. There aren't many land plains in the Endless Sea. It's very likely that my friend is here. Zhang Li and Yan Fan nodded at the same time, and then they flew into the sky. Screech, a crisp cry rang out from the dense forest of immortal trees. Then, an immortal bird that was thousands of feet tall rushed out of the dense forest and opened its huge beak to swallow Jian Wushuang. The result was obvious. The huge bird's head was almost torn in half by Yan Fan. Have you ever seen a 9 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal with scarlet golden eyes and 9 colorful feathers in his hair? Jian Wushuang lay in front of the dying immortal bird and asked carefully. However, what he received was an extremely terrified shake of its head. Let's go. We'll continue to move forward and take a look. Perhaps we can find some clues, he said helplessly. Then, in the following period of time, this heavenly continent plane was almost turned upside down. All the Grand Yen Immortals, as well as all kinds of immortal birds and immortal beasts, were beaten up. After that, they were questioned before they were allowed to leave. Jian Wushuang and the others did not feel tired at all. Instead, they were enjoying themselves. It was not until a magnificent light enveloped the entire sky above the heavenly continent that they finally stopped. Immediately after, a voice that could not suppress its anger resounded throughout the wilderness. Enough, all of you stop. I've already tolerated you for a long time. You've injured my subordinates time and time again. Do you really think I'm made of mud? As the voice filled with resentment fell, the huge and dense immortal trees were all suddenly swept away, and then a figure with wings on his back arrived. Behind this figure, there were dozens of figures. Each of them emitted a terrifying energy fluctuation. They were all Grand Yen Immortals. The figure with the huge wings on her back was a woman with a beautiful and exquisite face. Their eyes met and Jian Wushuang and Yan Fan looked away awkwardly. There was no other reason than that this woman's figure was too explosive. Moreover, only the important parts were covered by feathers, and her beautiful figure was enough to be seen at a glance. Humph! Zhang Li snorted and looked straight into her eyes. Get out of the way. The woman was stunned and immediately said angrily, You actually want me to move aside? Do you know who developed this domain? I am the supreme ruler here. Not only did you hurt my subordinates, but you actually dare to speak rudely now? Are you courting death? Zhang Li's face turned cold. She grabbed the hilt of her sword and prepared to strike. Yan Fan hurriedly stopped her and looked at Jian Wushuang. Disciple asked quickly. Jian Wushuang understood and immediately asked, "No offense. We came here to find a friend. Have you seen a grand Yen immortal with golden eyes and 9 colorful feathers in his hair?" "Why should I tell you?" The woman with the wings on her back said coldly. "As for you guys, you have to give me an explanation first. Otherwise, there will be no peace." Yan Fan put his hands on his hips and put on a look of pain as he said, "An explanation? What explanation? Weren't these all obvious problems? These subordinates of yours, whenever they have something to do, they come up to join in the fun. Of course, I casually taught them a lesson. Moreover, I didn't kill them all. I only taught them a lesson or two. That's enough to give you face, right? You!" The beautiful woman with wings on her back was speechless for a moment. She glared at them with her teeth about to shatter. Her large chest heaved up and down as if she was enduring extreme anger. But she did not make the next move. She had a strong and clear intuition that the 3 figures before her were not easy to deal with. Even if all the experts in the entire heavenly continent tried to suppress them, they might not get the desired result. A moment later, the beautiful woman with wings on her back said in a deep voice, "You can leave. I'll let bygones be bygones for what happened just now. I just hope that you won't step into my heavenly region again." Yan Fan did not speak but looked at Jian Wushuang. He then said slowly, "We came here to find a friend. We were indeed in the wrong, but if we didn't do that, we would have been surrounded. There's no need to say anything else. You guys can leave." The pretty woman said coldly. Right now, she just wanted to ask these 3 fierce gods to leave. Jian Wushuang did not say anything more. After nodding his head, he finally said, "If you have seen my friend, please let me know." After saying this, they turned around and prepared to leave. At this moment, the beautiful woman with wings on her back suddenly said, "What's the relationship between you and the guy you just described? Why are you looking for him?" Jian Wushuang stopped and turned to look at her. "You know about him? Answer my question first," she said in a deep voice. Jian Wushuang said, "He is an old friend of mine. He was exiled to the endless sea for some reason. I came here to look for him." The pretty woman asked again, "Then how do you prove that you are his friend?" He thought for a moment, then shook his head. "I can't prove it, but if you have any news about him, you must let me know. He's injured, and I'm afraid his movements will be hindered in this endless sea." The beautiful woman's eyes were rippling as if she was considering the authenticity of Jian Wushuang's words. After a moment, she seemed to have made up her mind. "I know the guy you're talking about. He stayed with me for a while ago." Jian Wushuang was shocked. He had never expected to receive news about Di Qing again. "Where is he now?" "I don't know. I asked him to stay, but he refused." The pretty woman's eyes flashed with disappointment as she continued, "He might not be too far away. He said that he won't be found soon." Jian Wushuang was overjoyed. As long as Di Qing had not walked out of the sea area, he would definitely be able to find him in a very short time. Thinking of this, he no longer hesitated and turned to leave. "Wait!" At this moment, the pretty woman hurriedly descended from the sky, then folded her wings and came to Jian Wushuang. "Are you really his friend? What else?" Jian Wushuang said helplessly. The pretty woman's face suddenly turned red. "If you are his friends, I will go with you to find him." As soon as she finished speaking, all the grand Yen immortals said anxiously, "Immortal Lord Fu Yao, you can't. The heavenly continent can't be without a master." The pretty lady called Fu Yao curled her lips imperceptibly and said coldly, "Don't interrupt. I have my own arrangements." All the grand Yen immortals were silent out of fear, but they still looked at her nervously. Jian Wushuang was also puzzled. "Why are you coming with us?" The pretty woman was flustered, and her cheeks turned even redder. She stuttered, "Why? Why are there so many whys? If I go with you, won't it increase the possibility of finding him?" Jian Wushuang did not stop her. He shrugged and said, "Let's go." When she heard this, her eyes lit up with joy. "All right, wait for me for a moment. I'll leave with you immediately." In the following period of time, all the Grand Yen Immortals who disagreed were beaten up by Immortal Lord Fuyao. The strength of her attacks was not inferior to Yen Fan's. When the Grand Yen Immortals no longer dared to refute, Immortal Lord Fuyao nodded in satisfaction. Then, she followed behind Jian Wushuang and flew towards the Endless Sea. As they traveled across the sea area, Fuyao, who was following behind Jian Wushuang, seemed to be thinking about something. Soon, she walked side by side with him and asked in embarrassment, May I ask what that guy's name is? Why are you asking this?" Jian Wushuang did not understand what she meant, and was even more confused about her intentions. I just want to know. You won't even tell me this, right?" Fui Yo said in a panic. He was helpless. Di Qing. Di Qing. What a domineering name. Her face turned slightly red again as she muttered to herself. Jian Wushuang was confused by her abnormal behavior, but he did not pay too much attention to it. After all, finding Di Qing was the most important thing at the moment. Then, Immortal Lord Fuyao said, "Then can you tell me about his past?" This time, the one who answered her was Yen Fan. "I say, little girl, you're asking in such detail. Isn't it because you have feelings for my disciple's friend? Your bashful attitude isn't likable." Immortal Lord Fuyao's face instantly turned red. What? I don't like him. I was just casually asking." Yen Fan smiled maliciously and was slapped away by Zhongli. It was only then that Jian Wushuang, who had a long emotional reflex, finally realized why Immortal Fuyao was so concerned about Di Qing. It turned out that she had already developed that hazy feeling in her heart. Thinking of this, Jian Wushuang could not help but smile. It seemed that Di Qing, who had been single for countless years, was going to have his luck turned very soon, after leaving Immortal Lord Fui Yo's heavenly continent. For figures were like a beautiful stream of light, traveling hundreds of millions of miles in an instant. The Endless Sea began to truly enter the stage of desolation and death. As he continued to venture deeper, there were no longer any more heavenly continent plains formed by the remains of the Yen Immortal above the Endless Sea. Jian Wushuang started to worry. Would Di Qing get lost in the sea area? That would make it more difficult for him to find him. As they continued to move forward, a line of water followed closely in the dark and boundless sea.